Blood stained the Arizona dust that September afternoon in 1878, and not a single soul moved to stop it. When Harlan Moore's fist connected with his wife's face in the middle of Red Willow's main street, the town held its breath, not in shock, but in practiced silence. They'd all heard the screams behind closed doors. They'd all seen the bruises beneath her Sunday collar. But a man's marriage was his own business, and Eliza Moore had learned that lesson in broken ribs and blackened eyes. Then a stranger stepped forward. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The heat rose in shimmering waves from Red Willow's main street, distorting the false-fronted buildings that lined both sides of the rutted thoroughfare. It was the kind of September heat that made men irritable and horses skittish, the kind that settled into your bones and made even breathing feel like work. Eliza Moore had learned to read weather like she'd learned to read her husband's moods, with careful attention and growing dread. She knew the signs, the particular set of Harlan's jaw when he'd been drinking since noon, the way his shoulders hunched forward when rage was building behind his eyes, the deliberate heaviness of his footsteps that meant he was looking for a reason, any reason, to unleash whatever demons were clawing at his insides. Today, she'd given him that reason by existing. The morning had started like most others in the 5 years since she'd made the mistake of becoming Mrs. Harlan Moore. She'd woken before dawn to make his breakfast, moving quietly through the small house on the edge of town, trying not to disturb him. But Harlan had already been awake, already been drinking, and the eggs she'd prepared weren't hot enough, or they were too hot, or they weren't the way his mother used to make them. The specific transgression didn't matter. It never did. Worthless, he'd muttered, shoving the plate away. Can't even cook a decent breakfast. Eliza had said nothing. 5 years had taught her that silence was safer than defense, that apologies only gave him more to work with, that the best strategy was to become as small and invisible as possible and wait for the storm to pass. But today the storm followed her. She'd needed supplies from Henderson's general store: flour, sugar, thread for mending. The walk into town was usually her only respite, the only time she could breathe without wondering what mood would greet her when she returned. She'd nodded to Mrs. Patterson on the boardwalk, managed a thin smile for old Doc Crawford, moved through the world like a ghost trying desperately to appear human. Then she'd heard his voice behind her. "Eliza!" Her spine had gone rigid. She'd turned slowly, hoping she'd imagined it, knowing she hadn't. Harlan was weaving down the center of the street, his shirt untucked, his hat missing, his face flushed with whiskey and something darker. "Harlan," she kept her voice steady, neutral. "I'm just getting supplies. I'll be home soon to start supper." "Supplies." He spat the word like it tasted rotten. "You're out here parading around town, spending my money, acting like you're somebody." "I'm not." She stopped herself. Explaining would only make it worse. "I'll head home now." "Damn right you will." He'd grabbed her arm then, his fingers digging into the bruises that already circled her bicep like ugly bracelets. She tried to pull away. Not forcefully, never forcefully, but enough to loosen his grip. It was the wrong move. The first blow caught her across the cheek, snapping her head sideways and filling her mouth with the copper taste of blood. She stumbled, her packages falling into the dust, but Harlan's grip on her arm kept her from falling completely. "Harlan, please." The words came out thick, slurred by her already swelling lip. "Not here. People are... I don't give a damn who's watching." His voice rose to a roar that echoed off the building fronts. "You're my wife. You do what I say, when I say it, and you don't embarrass me by prancing around town like some kind of..." The second blow drove her to her knees. The street came up hard, and she tasted dust mixed with blood. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear the whispers starting, the shuffle of feet as people moved away or stopped to watch. No one approached. No one ever approached. "Please," she whispered, hating the weakness in her voice, hating that she was begging in front of half the town, hating that this was her life. I'm sorry. Just let me go home." "Oh, you'll go home all right." Harlan yanked her to her feet by her hair, and Eliza bit back a scream. "And when we get there, I'll teach you proper respect for your husband." She'd heard those words before. She knew what they meant. The belt, The closed fists, the hours of pain followed by days of carefully hiding the evidence. She'd survived it before. She'd survive it again. It was what she did. It was all she could do. Harlan raised his fist again, and Eliza closed her eyes. The blow never landed. That's enough. The voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it cut through the afternoon heat like a knife through silk. Eliza opened her eyes to see a man she didn't recognize standing between her and Harlan. Not a large man, though he stood nearly 6 feet, wearing dusty trail clothes and a hat pulled low against the sun. He'd positioned himself at an angle, one hand resting casually near the gun at his hip, his posture relaxed but ready. "Step aside," Harlan snarled. "This is between me and my wife." "No." The stranger's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "I don't believe it is. Not anymore. You got no right." "I've got every right." Now there was steel beneath the gentleness. "Any man's got a right to stop what I'm seeing here. What you're doing to that woman. That's not a husband's business. That's a coward's." The crowd had gone completely silent. Eliza, still on her knees in the dust, stared up at the stranger with something that felt dangerously close to hope. In 5 years of marriage, through countless beatings and endless nights of terror, not one person had ever stepped between her and Harlan's fists. Harlan's face went from red to purple. "You calling me a coward?" "I'm stating a fact." The stranger's hand moved slightly, adjusting his stance. "Now, you're going to step away from the lady, and you're going to do it now." "The hell I am! She's my wife, my property. I'll do whatever I damn well please with—" "Not while I'm breathing." The words fell like stones into water, sending ripples through the gathered crowd. Eliza saw Sheriff Dalton push his way through the onlookers, his face tight with an expression she couldn't quite read. The sheriff was a decent enough man, but he'd made it clear on more than one occasion that what happened between a husband and wife wasn't the law's concern. "Now, gentlemen," Dalton said, his hand raised in a placating gesture, "let's not do anything rash here. Reed, I know you mean well, but—" "Reed!" Harlan swung toward the sheriff. "You know this bastard?" "Reed Walker," the sheriff said. "Came through a few days back. Been staying at the boarding house." He turned to the stranger. "Reed, I appreciate the sentiment, but this is a domestic matter. The law. The law be damned." Reed's voice remained steady, but Eliza heard the edge in it now. "I just watched this man beat his wife bloody in the middle of the street while the whole town stood and watched. You telling me the law says that's acceptable?" "I'm saying the law gives a man certain rights regarding his household, and what about her rights?" Reed gestured toward Eliza without taking his eyes off Harlan. "What about her right not to be beaten half to death?" "She's got no rights," Harlan shouted. "She's my wife. She took vows. She swore to obey me, and by heaven she'll—" He lunged for Eliza again, and everything happened at once. Reed moved faster than Eliza would have thought possible, intercepting Harlan mid-lunge and using the bigger man's momentum to spin him away from her. Harlan stumbled, caught his balance, and came back swinging. His fist connected with Reed's jaw with a sound like an axe hitting wood, but Reed barely flinched. He blocked the next punch, then the next, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of experience. "Stop this!" Sheriff Dalton was shouting. "Both of you, stop right now or I'll—" Harlan pulled a knife. The crowd gasped and scattered. Eliza screamed a warning, but Reed had already seen it. He caught Harlan's wrist as the blade came down, twisted, and there was a sharp crack that made Eliza's stomach turn. The knife fell into the dust. Harlan howled, clutching his arm, and Reed stepped back, breathing hard but standing firm. "That's assault!" Harlan screamed at the sheriff. "You saw it! He assaulted me! Arrest him!" Sheriff Dalton looked torn, his gaze moving from Harlan to Reed to Eliza, still kneeling in the dust with blood running down her chin. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which way the law would fall. "Mr. Moore pulled a knife," Reed said quietly. "I defended myself, that's all." "He broke my arm!" "Better than what you'd have done to your wife if I hadn't stopped you." Reed's voice was hard now, all pretense of gentleness gone. "How many times have you done this to her, Moore? How many times has she bled because of you? That's none of your— How many times has this town watched and done nothing?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Eliza saw faces in the crowd turn away, shame-coloring cheeks that had been flushed with curiosity moments before. Mrs. Patterson, who'd nodded to her just minutes ago, looked at her feet. Doc Crawford, who'd treated her falls and accidents for years, suddenly found the sky fascinating. "Somebody help her up," Reed said, and there was command in his voice now, the kind that made people move without thinking. "Doc, she needs attention." Doc Crawford hesitated, then stepped forward, offering Eliza his hand. She took it with shaking fingers, letting him pull her to her feet. Her legs felt weak, her head spinning, but she was standing. She was standing, and Harlan wasn't touching her. "This ain't over," Harlan spat at Reed, cradling his injured arm. "You hear me? This ain't—" "It is for today." Sheriff Dalton had finally made his decision. "Harlan, you're drunk and you pulled a weapon. I'm taking you in to cool off. Reed, you'll need to come answer some questions. And Mrs. Moore—" He looked at Eliza with something that might have been pity. "Ma'am, Doc Crawford will see to your injuries." "She's coming home with me," Harlan insisted. "She's my wife." "No." The word came from Eliza's own mouth, surprising her as much as everyone else. She'd said it. She'd actually said it. "No, I'm not going home with you." The silence that followed was absolute. "What did you say?" Harlan's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel everyone watching, could feel the weight of years of silence pressing down on her, could feel the terror that lived in her bones screaming at her to take it back, to apologize, to submit before the consequences became unbearable. But Reed was still standing between her and Harlan, and for the first time in 5 years someone had said the words she'd never dared even think. "Not while I'm breathing." "I said no." Her voice shook, but it held. "I'm not going home with you, Harlan. Not today. Not ever again if I can help it." Harlan's face contorted with rage. "You can't—" "Sheriff," Eliza said, turning to Dalton, "my sister lives above the Mercantile. I'd like to go there, please." Sheriff Dalton looked uncomfortable, but after a long moment, he nodded. "All right, Mrs. Moore, that seems reasonable. Harlan, you're coming with me. We'll sort this out when you're sober." "You can't do this," Harlan was shouting again as Dalton took his good arm. "She's my wife! My wife! You can't just let her—" "I can, and I am," Dalton said firmly. "Now come on before I add disturbing the peace to the charges." As the sheriff led Harlan away, still shouting threats and curses, Eliza found herself swaying on her feet. Doc Crawford steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Come on, Mrs. Moore," he said quietly. "Let's get you cleaned up." But before she could move, Reed stepped closer. Up close, she could see that his jaw was already swelling where Harlan had hit him, could see the steady resolve in his gray eyes, could see something in his expression that she hadn't seen directed at her in longer than she could remember. Respect. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "you all right?" It was such a simple question, asked with such genuine concern, that Eliza felt something crack inside her chest. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. She'd cried enough. She'd bled enough. She'd been enough of a victim for one day. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I think I might be. Eventually." A small smile tugged at the corner of Reed's mouth. "Yes, ma'am. I believe you will be." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate for what he'd done, for what he'd risked. "Thank you for... No thanks needed." He glanced toward where the sheriff was still struggling to control Harlan. "But if I might offer some advice?" Eliza nodded. "Don't go back to him. Whatever happens, whatever anyone says, whatever pressure they put on you, don't go back. You deserve better than what he's given you." "I don't have anywhere else to go. My sister, she can't—" "We'll figure something out," Reed said, "one step at a time. Right now, let the doc tend to those injuries. The rest we'll worry about tomorrow." Doc Crawford gently guided Eliza toward his office, and as they walked, she heard the murmurs starting in the crowd. They'd be talking about this for weeks. The stranger who'd stood up to Harlan Moore, the wife who'd refused to go home, the spectacle in the middle of Main Street on a hot September afternoon. Let them talk, Eliza thought, touching her split lip with careful fingers. Let them talk all they want. For the first time in 5 years, she'd stood up for herself. For the first time in 5 years, someone had stood up for her. "Not while I'm breathing." The words echoed in her mind as Doc Crawford led her up the stairs to his office above the pharmacy. Through the window, she could see Reed Walker standing in the street where it had all happened, watching to make sure she got inside safely. Even from this distance, even through the pain and shock and lingering terror, she could feel the strength of his presence. A stranger, a cowboy passing through town, a man who'd had no reason to intervene, no obligation to care, no stake in her suffering, but he'd stepped forward anyway. "Sit down, Mrs. Moore," Doc Crawford said, guiding her to a chair. "Let me have a look at you." Eliza sat, wincing as her bruised ribs protested. The doctor brought water and clean cloths, and as he began to gently clean the blood from her face, she realized he wasn't meeting her eyes. "Doc?" she said softly. "I'm sorry, Eliza." His voice was thick with shame. "All these years, all the times you came in here with accidents and falls. I knew what he was doing to you, and I said nothing, did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that a man's marriage was his own business, but the truth is—" He finally looked at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "The truth is, I was a coward, and I'm sorry." Eliza didn't know what to say. She'd been angry at the townspeople for so long, had felt the bitter sting of their turned backs and closed doors. But now, looking at the genuine remorse on Doc Crawford's weathered face, she found she didn't have the energy for anger anymore. "It took a stranger to do what we should have done years ago," the doctor continued, dabbing at her split lip with careful fingers. "A man who's been in town less than a week showed more courage than the rest of us combined. That's something I'll have to live with." "You're helping now," Eliza said. "That counts for something." "Does it?" He set down the bloody cloth and reached for his medical bag. "I'm going to check your ribs. This might hurt." It did hurt, but Eliza was used to pain. She breathed through it as the doctor's experienced hands probed her sides, checking for breaks or serious damage. She'd been lucky this time, if you could call it luck. Bruised ribs, a split lip, a black eye that was already starting to swell. She'd had worse. Much worse. "Nothing broken," Doc Crawford announced, "but you'll be sore for a good while. I'll give you something for the pain and some salve for the bruising." He paused, then added quietly, "Eliza, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right." "How bad has it been? I've seen the bruises you've tried to hide, treated the injuries you've explained away, but I never pushed. I should have, but I didn't. So I'm asking now, how bad has it been?" Eliza looked at her hands, folded in her lap. Her knuckles were scraped from when she'd fallen, and she could see the yellowing remains of older bruises on her wrists. "How did you quantify 5 years of fear? How did you measure the weight of flinching every time your husband walked into a room? How did you explain the exhaustion of constantly calculating, constantly adjusting, constantly trying to be small enough, quiet enough, perfect enough to avoid the next beating?" "Bad," she said finally. "It's been bad, Doc. Since about 3 months after we married. At first it was just yelling, insults, then he pushed me once, then it was a slap, then—" She took a shaky breath. "Then it was whatever he felt like doing, whenever he felt like doing it. And it got worse every time I tried to fight back or stand up for myself, so I stopped trying. I just endured." "Has he ever—" Doc Crawford cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Has he ever hurt you in ways that— beyond the beatings, I mean?" Eliza understood what he was asking. "No, not that. But he's threatened it. When he's really angry, when I've disrespected him somehow, he says things about teaching me my place in ways that—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Doc Crawford's jaw tightened. That man needs to be in prison, not just the drunk tank. "The law won't see it that way. He's my husband. He has rights." "To hell with his rights," the doctor said with sudden vehemence. "You have rights too, Eliza. You have the right to live without fear, the right to not be beaten, the right to—" A knock on the door interrupted him. Doc Crawford called out permission to enter, and Eliza's sister Mary burst into the room. "Eliza!" Mary rushed to her side, tears already streaming down her face. "Oh, Eliza, I heard what happened. Are you all right? Don't answer that. Of course you're not all right. I saw your face. I saw—" She knelt beside the chair, taking Eliza's hands in hers. "You're coming to stay with me." "I don't care what anyone says. I don't care what Harlan threatens. You're coming to stay with me." "Mary?" Your husband, Thomas already knows and he agrees. He says he should have intervened years ago, should have stood up to Harlan, should have. Mary's voice broke. We all should have done something. But that cowboy, that stranger, he showed us what courage looks like. And now we're going to find some of our own. Eliza felt the tears she'd been holding back finally break free. She let Mary pull her into a careful embrace, mindful of her injuries, and wept against her sister's shoulder. Not tears of pain or fear, but of something that felt dangerously close to relief. It's all right, Mary murmured, stroking her hair. You're safe now. You're safe. But even as she said it, even as Eliza wanted desperately to believe it, they both knew it wasn't true. Harlan would be released from jail eventually, probably before nightfall. And when he was released, he'd come looking for her. He'd demand she return home. He'd call it his right, his duty, his obligation as her husband, and the law would likely agree with him. The thought must have shown on Eliza's face, because Mary gripped her hands tighter. We'll figure this out, she said firmly. I don't know how yet, but we will. You're not going back to him, Eliza. I won't let you. Thomas won't let you. And that cowboy, Reed, they said his name was, he made it pretty clear he won't let you either. He's a stranger, Eliza protested weakly. He'll move on. Men like that don't stay in one place for long. Maybe, Mary conceded, but he's here now, and right now is what matters. Doc Crawford finished bandaging Eliza's more serious cuts and pressed a small bottle into her hands. Laudanum, he said. Just a few drops in water if the pain gets too bad. But be careful with it. It's strong. Thank you, Doc. Don't thank me yet. He looked between the two sisters, his expression grave. Ladies, you need to understand something. What happened today? It changes things. Harlan's been publicly humiliated. His authority's been challenged. His wife's been taken from him. Men like Harlan Moore don't forget that kind of thing, and they don't forgive it. He'll be angry now, but when that anger turns to cold calculation, he shook his head. Just be careful. Lock your doors. Don't go anywhere alone. And if he comes around making threats, you come get me or the sheriff immediately. The reality of what Doc Crawford was saying settled over Eliza like a cold blanket. She'd stood up to Harlan. She'd defied him publicly. She'd humiliated him in front of the entire town. He would never forgive her for that. Come on, Mary said, helping her to her feet. Let's get you upstairs to my place. You need rest, and Thomas will want to know you're all right. They descended the stairs carefully, Eliza moving slowly thanks to her bruised ribs. The street below had mostly cleared, the afternoon's excitement having given way to normal business. Though Eliza could see people watching from windows and doorways, could feel the weight of their gazes. Reed Walker was still there. He was sitting on the bench outside the general store, his hat tilted back, watching the sheriff's office with the patient attention of a man who had nowhere else to be. When he saw Eliza and Mary emerge from Doc Crawford's office, he stood, touching his hat in greeting. Mrs. Moore, he said. Ma'am. This last was directed at Mary. Mr. Walker, Mary said. I'm Mary Henderson, Eliza's sister. I wanted to thank you for what you did today. That took real courage. Reed shrugged. Just did what needed doing. Most men wouldn't have, Mary said pointedly. Most men haven't, for 5 years. Then most men should be ashamed of themselves. Reed's gaze shifted to Eliza. How are you feeling, ma'am? Sore, Eliza admitted, but better, safer. Thanks to you. Don't thank me yet, he said, echoing Doc Crawford's words. Your husband's still in the sheriff's office, but Dalton won't be able to hold him much longer. Few hours at most. Once he's released, I know, Eliza said quietly. He'll come looking for me. Which is why I'm going to be nearby, Reed said. I've got a room at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, but I'll make sure to keep an eye on the mercantile. Anyone tries to cause trouble, they'll have to go through me first. Mary looked like she wanted to argue, probably to say that he didn't need to put himself at risk for strangers, but Eliza spoke first. Why? She asked. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. You could have walked away, could have minded your own business like everyone else did. So why? Reed was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. I had a sister once, Martha. She married a man who seemed decent enough at first, but after the wedding, he paused, his jaw working. He hit her, beat her, made her life hell, and I was too young, too far away, too wrapped up in my own concerns to see what was happening until it was too late. What happened to her? Eliza asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. She died, Reed said flatly. Official cause was a fall down the stairs, but we all knew the truth. Her husband killed her, and he got away with it because the law said what happened between a man and his wife was their own business. His eyes focused on Eliza again, and she saw old pain there, old rage kept carefully contained. So when I saw your husband hitting you in the street, saw you bleeding in the dust while people just watched, I couldn't walk away. Won't walk away. Not this time. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes again. I'm sorry about your sister. So am I. Reed's expression softened slightly. But maybe I can make sure another man's sister doesn't end up the same way. Maybe I can make sure you get the chance Martha never had, the chance to live free and safe. That's a generous thought, Mr. Walker, Mary said, but Eliza's situation is complicated. The law's wrong, Reed interrupted. And sometimes, when the law's wrong, people have to do what's right regardless. He looked at Eliza. I'm not saying I have all the answers, ma'am. I'm not saying this will be easy. But I am saying you won't face it alone. Not if I can help it. Before Eliza could respond, the door to the sheriff's office opened and Harlan emerged. Even from across the street, Eliza could see the rage radiating off him like heat. His injured arm was in a makeshift sling, and his face was contorted with fury. Sheriff Dalton stood in the doorway behind him. Remember what I said, Harlan, the sheriff called. You stay away from your wife until you've sobered up and calmed down. I mean it. Harlan didn't respond. His eyes had locked onto Eliza, Mary, and Reed standing together outside the general store, and the hatred in his gaze made Eliza's blood run cold. Reed stepped forward, positioning himself between the women and Harlan, his hand resting casually near his gun. Evening, Moore, he said conversationally. Arm feeling better? Harlan started across the street, his good hand clenched into a fist, but Sheriff Dalton called out sharply, Harlan, don't make me arrest you again. Harlan stopped in the middle of the street. For a long, terrible moment, Eliza thought he might keep coming anyway, might charge at them regardless of the consequences. But finally, he turned his venomous gaze on her alone. This ain't over, Eliza, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. You hear me? This ain't over. You're my wife, my property, and I'll be damned if I let some saddle tramp and your meddling sister take what's mine. She's not property, Reed said quietly. She's a human being, and she's under protection now. Your protection? Harlan laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. You won't be here forever, cowboy. You'll move on eventually, and when you do, I'll still be here. I'll still be her husband, and I'll make her pay for every moment of this humiliation. Eliza felt her knees weaken, but Mary's arm around her shoulders kept her upright. Go home, Harlan, Sheriff Dalton said firmly. Sleep it off. We'll talk about this tomorrow when you're sober. Harlan stood there a moment longer, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with promises of violence. Then he spat in the dust at his feet and turned away, stalking off down the street toward the small house at the edge of town where Eliza had lived 5 years of hell. The silence he left behind was heavy with tension. Come on, Mary said softly. Let's get you upstairs. You need rest. But Eliza couldn't move. She stood frozen, watching Harlan's retreating back, feeling the weight of his threats settling over her like chains. He was right. Reed would move on eventually. The sheriff couldn't protect her forever. And when the initial outrage of today's events faded, when life returned to normal and everyone went back to minding their own business, she'd still be Harlan Moore's wife. And he'd make her pay. Mrs. Moore, Reed's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. Look at me. She dragged her gaze from Harlan's disappearing figure to meet Reed's steady gray eyes. I meant what I said, he told her. Not while I'm breathing. Do you understand? Whatever happens, however long it takes, you're not facing this alone. I give you my word on that. But you can't stay in Red Willow forever, Eliza said. You have your own life to live, your own path to follow. You can't put that aside for a woman you just met. A small, sad smile tugged at Reed's mouth. Maybe I've been looking for a reason to put down roots somewhere. Maybe this is it. Mr. Walker. Read, he corrected gently. And we'll take this one day at a time, all right? Right now you need rest and healing. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the next step. That's all we can do, take it one step at a time. Mary guided Eliza toward the stairs that led to the rooms above the mercantile, and as they climbed, Eliza looked back to see Reed resuming his position on the bench, settling in to watch and wait. A stranger, a cowboy who owed her nothing, a man who'd stepped between her and violence and said the words that would echo in her mind for days, weeks, years to come. Not while I'm breathing. In the small apartment above the mercantile, Mary fussed over her, drawing water for washing, finding clean clothes, making tea that Eliza couldn't quite manage to drink. Thomas Henderson came home from working in the store below, took one look at Eliza's battered face, and had to turn away to compose himself. I should have done something, he muttered. All this time, I should have. You're helping now, Eliza said, the same words she'd said to Doc Crawford. That's what matters. But even as she said it, even as Mary made up a bed for her and Thomas promised to keep watch through the night, even as the laudanum began to dull the edges of her pain, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The beginning of what? She didn't know. Freedom or further suffering, hope or deeper despair, a new life or a swift and brutal end to the old one. All she knew for certain was that things had changed. The silence had been broken. The secret had been dragged into the light. And there was no going back to the way things were, even if she'd wanted to. Through the window, in the gathering dusk, she could see the bench where Reed still sat, patient and watchful. Not while I'm breathing. The words were a promise, a shield, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Eliza clung to them as she finally, carefully, allowed herself to sleep. The first sleep in 5 years where she didn't have to listen for Harlan's footsteps, didn't have to calculate how drunk he was by the weight of his tread, didn't have to brace for whatever violence the night might bring. For tonight, at least, she was safe. And tomorrow, somehow, she'd find the courage to take the next step on a path she couldn't yet see but desperately needed to follow. A path that led away from Harlan Moore and towards something that looked almost like freedom. Dawn came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Eliza woke to unfamiliar walls, momentarily disoriented, her body a symphony of aches that reminded her exactly where she was and why. The events of yesterday crashed over her like cold water. Harlan's fists, Reed's intervention, her own voice saying the words she'd never dared speak before. No. She sat up carefully, her ribs protesting, and found Mary already awake and dressed, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee. You're up, Mary said softly. How do you feel? Like I was trampled by a horse, Eliza admitted, touching her swollen lip gingerly. But alive. That cowboy's still down there, Mary said, nodding toward the window. He spent the whole night on that bench. Thomas brought him coffee and breakfast around dawn, tried to convince him to get some sleep, but he just thanked him and stayed put. Eliza moved to the window, peering down at the street below. Reed was indeed still there, looking rumpled and tired but alert, his eyes scanning the street with methodical attention. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, caught sight of her in the window, and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. He's going to make himself sick, Eliza murmured. He's keeping his word, Mary corrected. There's a difference. She set down her coffee and turned to face her sister fully. Eliza, we need to talk about what happens next. You can stay here as long as you need, you know that. But Harlan's going to come back. He's going to demand you return home. And when he does, we need to have a plan. What kind of plan? I'm his wife, Mary. The law says I belong to him. He can drag me home by my hair if he wants, and the sheriff won't stop him. Maybe the law says that, Mary said firmly, but the law isn't always right. And after what happened yesterday, after the whole town saw what he did to you in broad daylight, maybe people won't be so quick to look the other way anymore. You have more faith in people than I do. Maybe. But I have faith in you. Mary crossed the room and took Eliza's hands. You said no yesterday. You stood up for yourself. That took more courage than anything I've ever seen. Don't give up that courage now. A knock on the door made them both jump. Thomas's voice came through the wood, careful and concerned. Eliza, Mary, Sheriff Dalton's downstairs. He'd like to speak with you both. Eliza's heart sank. This was it. The sheriff had come to tell her she had to go home, had to honor her marriage vows, had to submit to her husband's authority like a good Christian woman. But Mary squeezed her hands. We'll face this together. Come on. They descended the stairs to find Sheriff Dalton waiting in the mercantile, his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. Reed had come inside as well, standing near the door with his arms crossed, watching the lawman with undisguised suspicion. Mrs. Moore, Dalton began, then cleared his throat. I wanted to check on you this morning, see how you're healing. I'm fine, Sheriff, Eliza said, though her battered face told a different story. Good. That's good. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. I also wanted to talk to you about yesterday, about what happened. You mean about my husband beating me in the street? Eliza heard the edge in her own voice and didn't try to soften it. Or about the fact that it took a stranger to stop him while the rest of you watched. Dalton had the grace to look ashamed. You're right to be angry, Mrs. Moore. What happened yesterday, it shouldn't have happened. And the fact that it took an outsider to intervene when the rest of us have known about your situation for years, he shook his head. There's no excuse for it. So what are you going to do about it? Reed asked quietly from his position by the door. I've been thinking about that all night, Dalton admitted. The law is pretty clear on domestic matters. What happens between a husband and wife is generally considered their own business. But what Harlan did yesterday, he did it in public. He disturbed the peace. He pulled a weapon. That gives me some grounds to keep him in line. Some grounds, Reed repeated flatly, but not enough to actually protect her. I can't arrest a man for disciplining his own wife, Dalton said, and Eliza heard the frustration in his voice. Even if I wanted to, even if I think the law's wrong on this, my hands are tied. But, he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. But I can make it clear to Harlan that if he causes any more public disturbances, if he threatens anyone, if he shows up here trying to force Mrs. Moore to return home against her will, I'll throw him in a cell and keep him there as long as I legally can. That's something, I suppose, Mary said. But what about when he comes for her privately? What about when he shows up in the middle of the night or catches her alone somewhere? That's why I'm here, Reed said. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. I already told Mrs. Moore she's under my protection now. Anyone wants to get to her, they go through me first. Mr. Walker, I appreciate your intentions, Dalton said carefully, but you can't appoint yourself someone's personal guardian. That's not how the law works. Then maybe the law needs to work better, Reed replied, because from where I'm standing, the law's done a pretty poor job of protecting Mrs. Moore so far. The sheriff opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. After a moment, he turned back to Eliza. Mrs. Moore, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Yesterday, in front of witnesses, you said your husband has been beating you for years. Is that true? Eliza met his gaze steadily. Yes. How often? Often enough that I stopped counting. Sometimes once a week, sometimes every day for a month. It depended on his mood, how much he'd been drinking, whether I'd done something to displease him, which I always had, according to him. And you never reported it? The question stung, even though Eliza knew he hadn't meant it as an accusation. I tried, Sheriff. Once, about a year after we married. Do you remember? I came to your office with a black eye and a broken finger, and I told you Harlan had done it. Dalton's face darkened with the memory. I remember. And you told me that marriage was hard work, that all couples had disagreements, and that I should try to be a better wife. You sent me home to him. Eliza's voice remained steady, but she felt Mary's hand find hers, offering silent support. He beat me worse that night for embarrassing him. I never came back. I was wrong, Dalton said quietly. I know that doesn't change what happened, doesn't undo the years you suffered, but I was wrong, and I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air, unexpected and insufficient all at once. Eliza didn't know what to do with it, how to accept it or reject it, how to make it mean something when sorry couldn't turn back time or erase scars. Sheriff, Thomas spoke up from behind the counter, what exactly are you proposing here? Because if you're suggesting that Eliza should go back to Harlan with a promise that you'll keep a closer eye on things, that's not good enough. That's not nearly good enough. I'm not suggesting that at all, Dalton said. In fact, I'm suggesting the opposite. Mrs. Moore, do you want to go back to your husband? No, Eliza said without hesitation. I never want to see him again. Then don't. Dalton settled his hat back on his head. You stay here with your sister. If Harlan shows up making trouble, you send for me immediately. If he threatens you, you document it. And when the circuit judge comes through next month, you file for divorce. The word dropped like a stone into still water. Divorce. It was scandalous, nearly unthinkable, something that would brand her as fallen, as shameful, as a woman who'd failed in her most basic duty. But it was also the word that meant freedom. On what grounds? Mary asked. The judge won't grant a divorce just because Harlan's been rough with her. Most judges think a man has the right to discipline his wife. Maybe most judges, Dalton agreed, but Judge Harrison's lost 2 daughters, one to childbirth and one to a husband who drank himself mean. He's got no tolerance for men who abuse their wives. If Mrs. Moore can provide evidence of extreme cruelty, documented injuries, witness testimony— He looked at Doc Crawford, who'd just entered the mercantile. Doc, you've treated Mrs. Moore's injuries over the years. Would you be willing to testify to what you've seen? Doc Crawford didn't hesitate. Yes, I've kept records. Every time she came in with an injury, I wrote it down. The date, the nature of the wound, her explanations. I knew those explanations were lies, knew she was protecting him, but I documented everything anyway. Figured someday it might matter. It matters now, Dalton said. And if we can get other witnesses, people who've heard the fights, seen the bruises, witnessed yesterday's attack, we might have enough to convince Judge Harrison to grant the divorce. Might, Reed repeated. That's a lot of risk to take on might. It's better than nothing, Eliza said quietly. All eyes turned to her. It's better than going back to him. It's better than spending the rest of my life waiting for the next beating, the next threat, the next time he decides I need to be taught a lesson. If there's even a chance I could be free of him legally, I have to take it. Then that's what we'll do, Mary said firmly. We'll gather evidence, get witnesses, build a case that even the most conservative judge can't ignore. In the meantime, Dalton said, Mrs. Moore stays here, out of Harlan's reach. And I'll make it clear to him that if he tries anything at all, I'll make his life extremely difficult. What about his reaction? Reed asked. A man like Moore, publicly humiliated, his wife leaving him, facing potential divorce, he's not going to take that lying down. He's going to lash out, probably violently. That's why you're here, isn't it? Dalton said. And there was something almost like respect in his voice. To make sure that when he lashes out, he doesn't reach Mrs. Moore. Reed nodded. That's exactly why I'm here. Then I'd say we have ourselves an understanding. Dalton turned to leave, then paused at the door. Mrs. Moore, I know I don't have the right to ask this after failing you for so long, but I'm asking anyway. Trust me one more time. Let me try to make this right. Eliza studied the sheriff's face, seeing genuine remorse there, genuine determination to do better. Trust was a hard thing to give when it had been broken so many times before, but sometimes you had to choose to trust anyway, had to believe that people could change, could grow, could find courage they hadn't shown before. All right, Sheriff, she said. One more chance. After Dalton left, the group stood in silence for a moment, each processing what had just been decided. Eliza felt simultaneously lighter and heavier than before. Lighter because there was a plan now, a path forward that might lead to freedom, but heavier because she knew the hardest part was still ahead. Well, Thomas said, breaking the silence, I suppose we better start documenting everything. Doc, you said you have records? 5 years' worth, Doc Crawford confirmed. I'll compile them into a formal report for the judge. And I'll talk to the neighbors, Mary added. Mrs. Patterson lives close enough to Harlan's house that she must have heard the fights, and the Johnsons on the other side. If we can get them to testify, they won't want to get involved, Eliza said. Nobody wants to get involved? They didn't want to get involved when it was happening behind closed doors, Mary corrected. But yesterday changed things. Yesterday made it public, made it real, made it impossible to ignore. Some people might surprise you. Reed, who'd been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke. Mrs. Moore, with your permission, I'd like to pay a visit to your husband's house. See if there's anything there that might help your case. You mean break in? Eliza asked, shocked. I mean legally enter the property that you, as his wife, still have a right to access, Reed said carefully. If you were to give me permission to retrieve some of your personal belongings, clothes perhaps, or other items you might need, and I happened to notice evidence of violence while I was there, well, that would just be observant of me. That's dangerous, Thomas protested. If Harlan catches you there, he won't, Reed said with quiet confidence. He's a bully and a drunk, but he's not stupid. Right now he's probably nursing his wounded pride and his broken arm at the saloon. He won't go home until late, and by then I'll be long gone. What exactly are you looking for? Eliza asked. Anything that shows a pattern of violence, broken furniture, blood stains, holes punched in walls, anything that tells the story of what you've lived through. Reed's expression was grim. A man like your husband, he doesn't just beat his wife in the street one day out of nowhere. There's a history there, and history leaves evidence. Eliza thought about the house she'd called home for 5 years, about the careful way she'd learned to move through it, avoiding the loose floorboard that creaked, the doorway where Harlan liked to corner her, the bedroom where so many beatings had occurred. She thought about the broken chair she'd never been able to replace, the dent in the wall where he'd thrown her, the blood stain on the bedroom floor she'd tried and failed to scrub away. There's evidence, she said quietly. More than enough. Then I'll find it, Reed said, and I'll bring it back, along with any personal items you want. My grandmother's ring, Eliza said immediately. It's in a small wooden box in the bedroom, hidden under the loose floorboard near the window. And my mother's Bible, it's on the shelf in the sitting room. Those are the only things that matter to me. Everything else can burn. Reed nodded. I'll get them. Anything else? Just... Eliza hesitated, then continued. Just be careful. Harlan keeps a shotgun above the door and a pistol in the desk drawer. And if he does come home early, don't try to fight him. Just leave. Those things aren't worth your life. I appreciate the concern, ma'am, Reed said with a slight smile. But I've handled worse than Harlan Moore. I'll be fine. After Reed left, Eliza found herself pacing the small apartment, unable to settle. Mary tried to distract her with tea and conversation, but every sound from the street below made her jump. Every shadow at the window made her heart race. He'll be all right, Mary said for the 3rd time. Reed strikes me as a man who knows how to take care of himself. I know, it's just... Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. He's doing all of this for me, risking himself for me, and I don't understand why. He told you why. His sister. I know what he said, but it seems like such a heavy burden to carry, such a debt to try to pay. Eliza moved to the window, looking down at the street where Reed had kept watch all night. What if he gets hurt because of me? What if Harlan... Stop, Mary said firmly. Stop borrowing tomorrow's troubles. Reed made his choice with open eyes. He knows the risks, and he's taking them anyway. The best thing you can do is honor that choice by using the opportunity he's giving you. Build your case. Fight for your freedom. Live. Live. Such a simple word, such a basic thing, and yet Eliza realized she hadn't truly lived in 5 years. She'd survived, endured, existed, but living was something else entirely. Living meant making choices, taking risks, hoping for better things. Living meant believing you deserved better things. Did she believe that? After 5 years of being told she was worthless, stupid, ugly, a burden, a disappointment, did she still believe she deserved anything better than what Harlan had given her? She wanted to. She wanted to so badly it hurt worse than her bruised ribs. An hour passed, then 2. Eliza wore a path in the carpet with her pacing until Mary finally insisted she sit down and eat something. The food tasted like ash in her mouth, but she forced it down, knowing she needed strength for what was coming. When Reed finally returned, the sun was past its zenith, and Eliza had nearly worn herself sick with worry. He came through the mercantile door carrying a small bundle of belongings and wearing an expression that made Eliza's stomach clench. "Did you find it?" she asked. "The ring and the Bible?" "I found them," Reed said, handing her the bundle. "They're safe." Eliza unwrapped the cloth to find her grandmother's ring, a simple gold band that had been worn smooth by decades of wear, and her mother's Bible, its leather cover soft with age. Tears pricked her eyes as she held these pieces of her past, these connections to women who'd loved her before Harlan had taught her she was unlovable. "Thank you," she whispered. "There's more," Reed said quietly. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I made a list. Everything I saw in that house that tells the story of what you've lived through. Doc Crawford's going to want to see it." Mary took the paper and unfolded it, her face growing paler as she read. When she finished, she looked at Eliza with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Eliza, I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was this bad." "What did you find?" Eliza asked Reed. "Evidence," he said simply. "Enough to make any reasonable person sick. Enough to convince a judge, I hope, that you're not exaggerating or being dramatic or any of the other things people like to accuse women of when they speak up about abuse." His jaw tightened. "Enough to make me wonder how you survived 5 years in that hell." "The same way anyone survives," Eliza said. "One day at a time, one breath at a time. You tell yourself the next beating might be the last, that tomorrow he might be gentler, that if you just try harder, do better, be perfect enough, maybe he'll stop." She laughed bitterly. "Of course, perfect is impossible, so the beatings never stop. But the hope, the foolish, desperate hope, that's what keeps you alive." "It's not foolish," Reed said. "Hope's never foolish. It's just sometimes misdirected. You were hoping Harlan would change, would become the man you thought you married. That hope was wasted on him. But hoping for freedom, for safety, for a better life, that hope is going to save you." Before Eliza could respond, they heard shouting from the street below. All three of them rushed to the window to see Harlan Moore standing in the middle of the street, drunk and furious, bellowing Eliza's name. "Eliza, get down here! Get down here right now!" Sheriff Dalton appeared from the direction of his office, moving quickly toward Harlan. "Moore, I warned you about this." "I want my wife," Harlan roared. "She's my wife, and I want her home where she belongs." "She's not coming home with you," Dalton said firmly. "Not today, not ever if she doesn't want to. Now go sleep it off before I throw you in a cell." "You can't keep her from me. The law says she's mine." "The law says a lot of things," Dalton replied, "and one of them is that disturbing the peace is an offense I can arrest you for. So I suggest you shut your mouth and go home before I do just that." Harlan swayed on his feet, his good hand clenched into a fist, his face purple with rage. For a moment, Eliza thought he might actually swing at the sheriff, might do something stupid enough to get himself locked up for more than just a night. But then his eyes found the window where Eliza stood watching, and his expression shifted into something colder, more calculating. "You think you can leave me?" he called up to her. "You think you can just walk away?" "I'll make you regret this, Eliza. I'll make you regret the day you were born. You're my wife, and you'll stay my wife until one of us is dead. You hear me? Till death do us part." The threat landed like a physical blow. Reed moved toward the door, but Thomas caught his arm. "Don't," Thomas said quietly. "That's what he wants. To provoke you into doing something that'll get you arrested. Let Dalton handle it." Reed looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment he nodded and stayed put, though his entire body was tense with the effort of restraint. Below, Sheriff Dalton had grabbed Harlan's arm. "That's it. You just threatened your wife in front of a dozen witnesses. You're spending the night in jail, and if you're smart, you'll spend it thinking about how to behave like a civilized human being." "You can't do this." "I just did. Now come on, before I add resisting arrest to the charges." Dalton hauled Harlan away, the drunk man still shouting threats and curses over his shoulder. The crowd that had gathered to watch slowly dispersed, and the street returned to its normal afternoon rhythm, as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Eliza sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. "Till death do us part." The words echoed in her mind, a promise and a threat all at once. Harlan had made it clear he would never let her go, never accept the divorce, never allow her to be free, which meant that one way or another, this situation was going to end in death, either his or hers. "Don't listen to him," Mary said, kneeling beside her chair. "He's just a drunk fool making empty threats." "They're not empty," Eliza said. "You know they're not. He means every word. And when he gets out of jail tomorrow, when his anger turns from hot to cold, when he starts planning instead of just reacting," she looked at her sister. "He's going to kill me, Mary. One way or another, that's how this ends." "No, Reed said from across the room. His voice was quiet but absolute. That's not how this ends. I won't let it. You can't watch me every hour of every day for the rest of my life, Eliza protested. Eventually, you'll have to sleep, have to look away, have to trust that I'm safe. And when you do, he'll be there. He'll wait as long as it takes, but eventually, he'll be there. Then we make sure there's no eventually, Reed said. We move faster than he does. We build the case, get the witnesses, convince the judge to grant the divorce. Once you're legally free of him, once you're no longer his wife in the eyes of the law, his claim over you disappears. And you think that'll stop him? Eliza asked bitterly. You think a piece of paper from a judge will make him suddenly accept that I'm not his property anymore? No, Reed admitted, but it'll give you legal protection you don't have now. It'll mean that if he comes after you, he's not just disciplining his wife. He's attacking a woman who has no connection to him. That's assault. That's a crime the law actually prosecutes. If he lets me live long enough to prosecute anything, Eliza muttered. The dark thought settled over the room like a shroud. They all knew she was right. They all knew that the most dangerous time for a woman trying to leave an abusive husband was right after she left, when his control was slipping and his rage was highest. Statistics didn't exist yet to prove it, but every woman who'd ever tried to escape knew it in her bones. Then we don't give him the chance, Mary said with sudden determination. We keep you safe, we keep you hidden, we keep you surrounded by people who'll protect you, and we move fast. Doc, how long will it take you to compile your records? A few days, Doc Crawford said. I'll work on it tonight, have something ready by the end of the week. And I'll start talking to potential witnesses tomorrow, Mary continued. Mrs. Patterson, the Johnsons, anyone who might have seen or heard something over the years. The more people willing to testify, the stronger the case. I'll document everything I saw in the house, Reed added, and I'll keep watch. Harlan won't get within 10 feet of Mrs. Moore without going through me first. Eliza looked around at these people, her sister, the doctor who'd finally found his courage, the stranger who'd become her unlikely guardian, and felt something shift in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. For 5 years she'd faced Harlan's violence in isolation, believing that no one cared, that no one would help, that she deserved what she got. But she'd been wrong. All right, she said quietly. We fight, we build the case, we get the witnesses, we convince the judge, and we pray it's enough. Over the next several days, Red Willow became a town divided. Some people, shamed by their years of inaction, stepped forward to support Eliza. Others, clinging to traditional views about marriage and a man's rights within it, sided with Harlan. Arguments broke out in the saloon, at church, in the general store. Women who'd suffered in silence found their voices. Men who'd looked the other way found their consciences. Mrs. Patterson, who'd listened to Eliza's screams through thin walls for years, came forward with dates and details, her own guilt driving her to finally speak truth. The Johnsons corroborated her testimony. 3 other women in town admitted they'd suffered similar abuse from their own husbands and wished they had Eliza's courage to leave. Doc Crawford compiled his records into a damning report that detailed 5 years of injuries consistent with repeated beatings. Thomas and Mary provided testimony about the changes they'd seen in Eliza after her marriage, how a bright, hopeful young woman had become a shadow of herself. And through it all, Reed kept watch. He moved his belongings from the boarding house to a small room Thomas offered him above the mercantile, positioning himself as a constant barrier between Eliza and any threat. When she needed to go somewhere, he accompanied her. When she stayed in, he stationed himself where he could see both the front and back entrances. Harlan, released from jail after a night to cool off, alternated between rage and self-pity. He drank more heavily than ever, ranting to anyone who'd listen about his ungrateful wife, the interfering cowboy, the changing world where a man couldn't even control his own household anymore. Some men sympathized with him. Others, seeing the evidence mounting against him, slowly withdrew their support. And all the while, the circuit judge's arrival drew closer, bringing with it the possibility of freedom or the certainty of continued bondage. Everything hung in balance, waiting for one man's decision to tip the scales one way or another. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, as Eliza sat in Mary's apartment with her grandmother's ring on her finger and her mother's Bible in her lap, as she listened to Reed's quiet footsteps pacing below and felt her sister's comforting presence nearby, She allowed herself something she hadn't felt in 5 years. She allowed herself to hope. That hope lasted exactly 9 days before Harlan made his move. It happened on a Tuesday evening, just as the sun was beginning to set and the streets were emptying of their usual traffic. Eliza had been helping Mary inventory stock in the mercantile, grateful for the distraction of honest work and the comfort of her sister's company. Reed was downstairs, as always, positioned near the window where he could watch the street, and Thomas was in the back room checking shipments. The first sign of trouble was the smell. Smoke, acrid and sharp, drifting through the evening air. Reed stood abruptly, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun as he peered out the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. Fire, small but growing, licking up the side of the building across the street. And in the chaos of people running to form a bucket brigade, in the confusion of shouting voices and ringing bells, Reed caught sight of a figure slipping through the back alley behind the mercantile. A figure he recognized. "Eliza!" Reed shouted up the stairs. "Mary! Get down here now!" The urgency in his voice brought both women running. Thomas emerged from the back room, his face already showing alarm. Reed was at the back door, his gun drawn, his body tense. "What's wrong?" Mary demanded. "Harlan's here. The fire's a distraction. He's coming in the back." Reed's eyes never left the door. "Thomas, get them upstairs and barricade the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or the sheriff. Understand?" "Reed, you can't face him alone," Eliza protested, even as fear made her voice shake. "I'm not letting him get to you. Now go! Go!" Thomas grabbed both women and hauled them toward the stairs, but before they could reach the first step, the back door exploded inward. Harlan stood in the doorway, and Eliza's heart stopped at the sight of him. He was drunk. That much was clear from his swaying stance and wild eyes. But he was also armed with a hunting knife that glinted in the fading light, and there was a madness in his expression that went beyond liquor. "There she is," Harlan said, his words slurring but his gaze locked on Eliza with terrible focus. "My dear, sweet, disobedient wife. Time to come home, Eliza." "She's not going anywhere with you," Reed said, positioning himself between Harlan and the others. "Put down the knife and walk away while you still can." "You," Harlan spat. "This is all your fault. You turned her against me. You poisoned her mind with your lies. She was fine before you came along, but you had to play the hero, didn't you? Had to stick your nose where it didn't belong." "She wasn't fine," Reed said calmly. "She was terrified and beaten and trapped. I didn't turn her against you more. You did that all by yourself." "I'm her husband. I have rights." "Not anymore, you don't." That circuit judge arrives in 2 days. 2 days, and Eliza gets her divorce. 2 days, and you lose whatever legal claim you think you have over her. But you know that, don't you? That's why you're here. That's why you set that fire. You're running out of time. Something in Reed's words seemed to snap whatever thin thread of control Harlan had been clinging to. He let out a roar of pure rage and lunged forward, the knife aimed at Reed's chest. Reed sidestepped smoothly, using Harlan's momentum against him just as he'd done in the street days ago. But Harlan was expecting it this time. He twisted mid-lunge, slashing wildly with the knife. The blade caught Reed across the forearm, opening a long gash that immediately began to bleed. Reed didn't even flinch. He grabbed Harlan's wrist, twisted hard, and drove his knee into the bigger man's stomach. Harlan doubled over, gasping, but managed to wrench his arm free. The knife clattered to the floor, and both men dove for it. "Thomas, get them out of here!" Reed shouted as he grappled with Harlan. But before Thomas could move, Harlan's foot connected with the knife, sending it skittering across the floor directly toward Eliza. Without thinking, operating on pure instinct, she bent down and snatched it up. "Eliza, no!" Mary screamed. But Eliza wasn't listening. She was staring at the knife in her hand, feeling its weight, remembering all the times Harlan had used weapons like this to terrorize her, to control her, to remind her of his power over her life and death. All the time she'd been helpless. All the time she'd had no choice but to endure. Not anymore. Harlan had managed to break free from Reed and was climbing to his feet, blood streaming from his nose where Reed had landed a solid punch. His eyes found Eliza holding the knife, and he laughed, a horrible sound that held no humor. "You going to stab me, Eliza? You going to kill your own husband?" He took a step toward her, swaying dangerously. You don't have the spine for it. You're weak. You've always been weak. That's why you need to come home with me so I can take care of you, make you strong, teach you. Teach me what? Eliza's voice came out steady and cold. How to hide bruises. How to lie about injuries. How to make myself so small and quiet that maybe, just maybe, you won't notice me enough to hit me. She raised the knife, pointing it at him. I learned those lessons already, Harlan. You were a very thorough teacher. Eliza, Reed said carefully, slowly getting to his feet while keeping himself between her and Harlan. Give me the knife. You don't need to do this. He's right, Harlan sneered. You don't have it in you. You're too much of a coward. That's why you need me. That's why you'll always need... I don't need you. The words burst from Eliza like a dam breaking. I have never needed you. You're a drunk and a bully and a coward who can only feel like a man by beating someone smaller and weaker than yourself. And I'm done. Do you hear me? I'm done being afraid of you. I'm done letting you control my life. I'm done. For just a moment, she saw fear flicker across Harlan's face. Real fear, the kind she'd lived with for 5 years. And in that moment, she understood something profound. He had always been afraid. Afraid he wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't man enough. And he'd tried to hide that fear by making her afraid instead, by making himself feel powerful through her powerlessness. But she wasn't powerless anymore. Eliza. Reed's voice was quiet but firm. Look at me. She dragged her gaze from Harlan to Reed, and in his steady gray eyes she saw understanding. He knew what she was feeling, knew the temptation to end this here and now, to solve the problem of Harlan Moore permanently. You give him that knife, Reed said, and he wins. Because you become the thing he's always tried to make you. You become violent. You become someone who takes life instead of cherishing it. Is that who you want to be? He deserves it, Eliza whispered. Maybe. Probably. But you deserve better than carrying that weight for the rest of your life. Reed held out his hand. Give me the knife. Let the law handle this. Let him face the consequences of his actions in front of a judge and a whole town that knows what he's done. That's real justice. Not this. Eliza's hand trembled. The knife felt so heavy, so tempting. It would be so easy to end it, to make sure Harlan could never hurt her again. But Reed was right. She'd fought too hard to reclaim her humanity to throw it away now. Slowly, carefully, she reversed the knife and placed the handle in Reed's outstretched hand. Harlan's face contorted with rage at being denied even this final confrontation. He launched himself at Eliza, forgetting Reed entirely in his blind fury. But Reed was faster. He dropped the knife and caught Harlan mid-charge, spinning him around and driving him face first into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. That's enough, Reed said, his voice deadly quiet. You're done terrorizing this woman. Done hurting her. Done threatening her. As of right now, your reign of terror is over. Harlan struggled, but Reed's grip was iron. Blood from Reed's wounded arm dripped onto the floor, mixing with the blood from Harlan's nose, but he didn't release his hold. Thomas, Reed said, go get Sheriff Dalton. Tell him Harlan Moore broke into the mercantile with a weapon and attempted to attack his wife. That's assault with a deadly weapon. That's breaking and entering. That's enough to keep him locked up until the judge arrives. Thomas ran for the door, nearly colliding with several townspeople who'd come running when they heard the commotion inside the mercantile. The fire across the street was already being brought under control, and it seemed the entire town was now crowded around the mercantile entrance, trying to see what was happening. I'll kill you, Harlan was snarling at Reed. I'll kill all of you. You can't keep me locked up forever. I'll get out, and when I do... When you do, I'll be waiting, Reed said calmly. And every time you come near Eliza, every time you threaten her, every time you even look at her wrong, I'll be there. For as long as it takes. For the rest of your miserable life, if necessary. Sheriff Dalton arrived moments later, taking in the scene with a grim expression. Harlan in Reed's grip, blood on the floor, the knife lying nearby, and Eliza trembling against the wall with Mary's arms around her. What happened here? Dalton demanded. Harlan Moore set a fire as a distraction, Reed explained, still holding the struggling man firmly. Then he broke in through the back door with a knife, threatening to take his wife home by force. He attacked me when I tried to stop him. There are at least a dozen witnesses outside who can testify to the fire, and everyone in this room can testify to the rest. That true, Mrs. Moore? Dalton asked. Eliza nodded, not trusting her voice. Then, Harlan Moore, you're under arrest for arson, breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and attempted kidnapping. And this time you're staying locked up until Judge Harrison arrives. I don't care what strings you try to pull or what friends you think you have. You're done. You can't do this, Harlan screamed as Dalton slapped shackles on his wrists. She's my wife. Mine. The law says you don't get to terrorize people, Dalton interrupted. The law says you don't get to burn down buildings and attack folks with knives. You want to talk about the law more? We'll let the judge explain it to you. As Dalton hauled Harlan toward the door, the drunk man twisted back to look at Eliza one last time. The hatred in his eyes was absolute, but beneath it, she could finally see what Reed had helped her understand. Fear. Harlan Moore was terrified. Terrified of losing control. Terrified of being exposed as weak. Terrified of facing consequences for the first time in his life. And that fear, Eliza realized, had never really been about her at all. She had just been convenient. She had been there. She had been vulnerable. She had been someone he could use to make himself feel powerful. But she wasn't that person anymore. The crowd parted as Dalton dragged Harlan through, and Eliza heard the murmurs starting. Some sympathetic to her, some shocked by the violence, some still clinging to the idea that a man had rights over his wife that superseded all other considerations. Let them murmur, Eliza thought. Let them judge. She'd survived worse than gossip. Once Harlan was gone and the crowd began to disperse, Mary finally released Eliza and turned her attention to Reed. You're bleeding, she said, grabbing a clean cloth from behind the counter. Sit down and let me look at that arm. Reed allowed himself to be led to a chair, and as Mary began to clean and bandage the knife wound, Doc Crawford pushed his way through the remaining onlookers. I heard there was trouble, the doctor said. Anyone hurt besides Reed? Just my pride, Thomas muttered. I should have done more to help. You did exactly what you should have done, Reed said, wincing as Mary probed the wound. You protected the women. That's what mattered. This is going to need stitches, Mary announced. Doc? Crawford took over, threading a needle with practiced efficiency. As he worked, Eliza found herself sinking into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving her shaking and cold. Here, Thomas said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. You're in shock. Just breathe. It's over now. Is it? Eliza asked. He said he'd kill us. When he gets out. If he gets out, Reed corrected, gritting his teeth as Doc Crawford pulled the first stitch tight. After what he did tonight, after the evidence we've compiled, after the witnesses who'll testify against him, Judge Harrison might just decide to keep him locked up for a good long while. And if he doesn't? Reed met her eyes steadily. Then we deal with it. Together? One day at a time, remember? One day at a time. It had become their shared mantra, the thing that kept Eliza moving forward when fear threatened to paralyze her. Just get through today. Worry about tomorrow when it comes. Don't let the weight of the future crush the present. The fire, Eliza said suddenly. The building across the street. Is everyone all right? Old Man Henderson's storage shed, Thomas reported. Nobody hurt and the fire's out. Didn't spread to the main building, thank heaven. But Harlan set it deliberately to draw people away from here. That's premeditated, calculated. The judge won't look kindly on that. Nothing Harlan did tonight will help his case, Doc Crawford agreed, tying off the last stitch. There. You'll have a scar, but the wound's clean. Keep it wrapped and dry for a few days and you'll be fine. Thank you, Doc, Reed said, flexing his fingers experimentally. The bandage was tight but not restrictive. Seems like I owe you for more than just medical care. That report you compiled, the testimony you're willing to give, it means something. It's the least I can do after years of doing nothing, Crawford said quietly. He turned to Eliza. And you, my dear, showed remarkable courage tonight. Facing down your husband like that, refusing to let fear control you, that took strength I'm not sure I could have mustered. I wanted to kill him, Eliza admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. When I had that knife in my hand, I wanted to end it, end him, make sure he could never hurt me again. But you didn't, Mary said firmly. You chose a better way. You chose to let justice work instead of taking vengeance, That's real strength. Was it? Eliza wasn't sure. Part of her still wondered if she'd made a mistake, if she should have ended the threat of Harlan Moore while she had the chance. But another part, the part that was slowly remembering who she'd been before 5 years of abuse, had tried to destroy her, knew that Reed had been right. She deserved better than to become what Harlan had tried to make her. Over the next 2 days, Red Willow talked of nothing but the confrontation at the Mercantile. The story grew with each retelling, gaining dramatic embellishments and losing factual details, until Eliza hardly recognized the event being described. In some versions, she'd fought Harlan off single-handedly. In others, Reed had nearly killed him. In still others, the fire had been a raging inferno that had threatened to consume the entire town. The truth was dramatic enough without embellishment, but Eliza supposed people needed to make sense of what they'd witnessed, needed to fit it into narratives that helped them understand a world where wives left husbands and strangers became heroes, and violence happened in broad daylight. Harlan remained locked in the jail, and this time Sheriff Dalton made it clear that no amount of pleading or bribery would change that fact. The charges were serious. The evidence was overwhelming, and the judge was due to arrive the next morning. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She sat by the window in Mary's apartment, watching the street below, wrapped in the same blanket Thomas had given her after the attack. Reed was down there somewhere in the darkness, keeping watch as he had every night. And knowing he was there should have been comforting. But all she could think about was tomorrow. Tomorrow, Judge Harrison would arrive. Tomorrow, her case would be heard. Tomorrow, she would stand before a representative of the law and ask to be released from the vows she'd made 5 years ago, asked to be granted a freedom that most people would say she had no right to claim. Tomorrow, her entire future would be decided by one man's judgment. "Can't sleep either?" Mary's voice came from the darkness behind her. Eliza shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him. I hear his threats. I feel his fists." She pulled the blanket tighter. "What if the judge says no, Mary? What if he decides that marriage vows are sacred regardless of what happens within them? What if he sends me back to Harlan?" "Then we run," Mary said simply. "We take you somewhere Harlan can't follow. California, maybe. Or north to Montana. Somewhere you can start over with a new name and a new life." "That's not freedom. That's just a different kind of prison." "Maybe. But it's better than the alternative." Mary sat down beside her sister, taking her hand. "Eliza, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever that judge decides, you're not going back to Harlan. I won't allow it. Reed won't allow it. Thomas won't allow it. We'll break the law ourselves if we have to, but we won't let you go back to that house." The fierce protectiveness in Mary's voice made Eliza's throat tight with emotion. "You could get in trouble. Real trouble. Helping a wife escape her husband, that's—" "I don't care," Mary interrupted. "You're my sister. Your family. And family protects family, no matter what the law says." They sat together in the darkness, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other as the night slowly gave way to dawn. And when the sun finally rose on the day that would determine Eliza's fate, she was as ready as she would ever be. Judge Harrison arrived on the noon stage, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Sheriff Dalton met him personally, and within an hour word had spread that the judge would hear Eliza's petition that very afternoon in the town hall. The building filled quickly, people cramming onto benches and standing along the walls, eager to witness what was already being called the most important legal proceeding Red Willow had ever seen. Eliza sat at the front with Reed on one side and Mary on the other, trying to ignore the weight of all those staring eyes. Judge Harrison took his seat behind a makeshift bench, arranged his papers with methodical care, and looked out over the assembled crowd with an expression that revealed nothing. "This court is now in session," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the packed room. "We're here today to hear a petition for divorce filed by Mrs. Eliza Moore against her husband, Mr. Harlan Moore, on the grounds of extreme cruelty. Mrs. Moore, you're represented by yourself, is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Eliza said, standing on shaking legs. "And Mr. Moore is currently being held in the county jail on criminal charges?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sheriff Dalton confirmed. "Arson, assault with a deadly weapon, breaking and entering, and attempted kidnapping." "I see." Harrison made a note. "And these charges stem from events that occurred 2 days ago?" "That's correct, Your Honor." Very well. Mrs. Moore, before we proceed with your petition, I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with here. Please tell me, in your own words, why you believe you're entitled to a divorce from your husband. This was it. The moment where everything hinged on her ability to speak truth, to make this stranger understand 5 years of horror condensed into a few minutes of testimony. Eliza took a deep breath and began. Your Honor, I married Harlan Moore 5 years ago. I thought I was marrying a good man, a kind man. For the first few months, he seemed to be exactly that, but then, she paused, gathering her courage. Then he started to change. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. He became angry, violent. He hit me for the first time about 3 months after our wedding. I'd burned his dinner. He said I needed to learn to do better, to be better. He said it was for my own good. And did the violence continue? Harrison asked, his expression still neutral. Yes, Your Honor. It got worse. What started as occasional slaps became regular beatings. He used his fists, his belt, whatever was convenient. He broke my ribs twice, gave me a concussion, split my lip so many times I lost count. And through it all, he told me it was my fault, that I deserved it, that if I just tried harder to be a good wife, he wouldn't have to discipline me. Did you seek help? Once, about a year after we married, I went to Sheriff Dalton with a black eye and a broken finger. I told him Harlan had hurt me. The sheriff sent me home and told me to try to be a better wife. Eliza saw Dalton flinch at the words, but continued. After that, I didn't ask for help again. I'd learned that no one would intervene between a husband and wife. So I endured. I survived. I waited for it to get better, or for it to kill me, whichever came first. What changed? Harrison asked. A stranger stepped in. A cowboy named Reed Walker. He saw Harlan beating me in the street, and he stopped it. And for the first time in 5 years, someone told me I didn't deserve what was happening to me. Someone gave me the courage to say no. Harrison's gaze shifted to Reed. Mr. Walker, you're the man who intervened? Reed stood. Yes, Your Honor. And what is your interest in this case? My interest is in seeing justice done, Your Honor, in making sure a woman who's been terrorized for 5 years gets the chance to live free and safe. Noble sentiments, Harrison said, and Eliza couldn't tell if he was being sincere or sarcastic. But I notice you've appointed yourself Mrs. Moore's protector. Some might say that suggests an inappropriate relationship between you and another man's wife. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Eliza felt her face flush with anger and shame, but before she could respond, Reed spoke. With respect, Your Honor, the only inappropriate relationship here is the one between Harlan Moore and his wife. What I've offered Mrs. Moore is protection and respect, nothing more. She's been beaten, terrorized, and threatened with death by the man who swore to love and cherish her. If offering her safety from that is inappropriate, then I'm guilty as charged. A murmur ran through the crowd. Harrison held up a hand for silence. I appreciate your candor, Mr. Walker. You may be seated. He turned back to Eliza. Mrs. Moore, I've read the preliminary reports. I've seen Dr. Crawford's medical documentation. I've reviewed the statements from witnesses, but I need to hear from you directly. Do you fear for your life if you're forced to return to your husband? Yes, Your Honor, Eliza said without hesitation. He's threatened to kill me multiple times. The last time, 2 days ago, he said we were married until death parted us, and he made it clear which one of us would die first. If you send me back to him, I won't survive it. Strong words. True words, Your Honor. Harlan Moore will kill me if given the chance. Of that, I have absolutely no doubt. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. This court does not grant divorces lightly, Mrs. Moore. Marriage is a sacred institution, and the vows taken within it are not to be cast aside for trivial reasons. However, he paused, and Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. However, the purpose of marriage is to create a partnership based on mutual respect and support. What you've described is not a marriage. It's systematic abuse and terrorization. And while some of my colleagues might argue that a wife owes obedience to her husband regardless of his treatment of her, I am not among them. Hope, fragile and terrifying, began to bloom in Eliza's chest. Based on the evidence presented, Harrison continued, and based on your testimony here today, I am prepared to grant your petition for divorce on the grounds of extreme cruelty. However, before I make my final ruling, I want to give Mr. Moore an opportunity to respond to these charges. Sheriff, bring in the defendant." The room erupted in whispers as Dalton left to fetch Harlan from the jail. Eliza gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She'd known this moment would come, known she'd have to face him again, but that didn't make it any easier. When Harlan entered, flanked by the sheriff, and still in shackles, Eliza forced herself to look at him. To really look at him, not with the eyes of a terrified wife, but with the eyes of a woman who'd survived his worst and was still standing. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The swagger was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man who knew he'd lost. But his eyes, when they found hers, still held that familiar hatred. "Mr. Moore," Judge Harrison said, "you've heard your wife's testimony. Do you wish to respond?" Harlan stood silent for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he laughed. "Respond? What's the point? You've already made up your mind, haven't you? She's won. She and that cowboy and everyone who turned against me. I could tell you my side, could explain how she drove me to it with her incompetence and her disobedience, could make you understand that I was only trying to make her into a proper wife. But you wouldn't listen. None of you would listen." "Try me," Harrison said mildly. "I'm listening now." "Fine. You want the truth? She's weak. She's always been weak. She needed guidance, discipline, structure. I provided that. Was I sometimes harsh? Yes. But harsh measures are necessary for harsh lessons. She needed to learn her place, learn respect, learn obedience. That's a husband's duty, to mold his wife into something worthy." The words were so familiar, so exactly what Harlan had told Eliza 1,000 times before, that she almost wanted to laugh. This was his defense. This was how he explained 5 years of violence. "I see," Harrison said, his expression hardening. "And do you believe you have the right to continue this guidance if Mrs. Moore is returned to you?" "She's my wife," Harlan said flatly. "Of course I have that right." "Then let me make something abundantly clear, Mr. Moore. You have no such right. You never did, and you never will again." Harrison's voice had gone cold as winter steel. "What you've described is not guidance or discipline. It's torture. It's cruelty. And it ends today." He banged his gavel once, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent room. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I hereby grant Mrs. Eliza Moore a full and complete divorce from Mr. Harlan Moore on the grounds of extreme and repeated cruelty. All bonds of marriage between them are dissolved effective immediately. Mrs. Moore, you are a free woman." The words took a moment to penetrate Eliza's understanding. Free. She was free. Legally, officially, irrevocably free. The courtroom erupted in noise. Some cheering, some protesting, all of them talking at once. But Eliza heard none of it. She was staring at Judge Harrison, at this stranger who'd just given her back her life, and she couldn't quite believe it was real. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, raising his voice to be heard over the din, "I'm issuing a restraining order prohibiting Mr. Moore from approaching, contacting, or harassing Mrs. Moore in any way. If he violates this order, he'll face immediate arrest and additional criminal charges." And speaking of criminal charges, Sheriff Dalton, I understand Mr. Moore is facing several serious accusations. "Yes, Your Honor. Arson, assault with a deadly weapon, breaking and entering, and attempted kidnapping." "Then I suggest you add those to the docket. We'll hear those cases tomorrow." Harrison looked at Harlan with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Moore, you're going to be a guest of the county jail for quite some time. I suggest you use that time to reflect on your actions and on the kind of man you've become. Perhaps, if you're fortunate, you'll emerge from this experience as someone worthy of being called human." Court is adjourned. The gavel fell again, final and absolute. Eliza felt Mary's arms around her, felt Reed's hand on her shoulder, heard voices congratulating her and asking questions and exclaiming over the verdict. But all she could focus on was the reality that was slowly, impossibly sinking in. She was free. After 5 years of prison disguised as marriage, after countless beatings and endless terror, after believing she'd die before she'd ever escape, she was finally, legally, completely free. Harlan was screaming something as Dalton dragged him from the courtroom, but Eliza didn't listen to the words. She'd heard enough of his words to last a lifetime. All that mattered now was the future, a future that, for the first time in 5 years, belonged entirely to her. Freedom, Eliza discovered, was both lighter and heavier than she'd imagined. The immediate aftermath of the judge's ruling passed in a blur of handshakes and well wishes from people who'd watched her suffer in silence for years. Mrs. Patterson wept openly and apologized for the 100th time. Doc Crawford gripped her hands and told her she was the bravest woman he'd ever known. Even Sheriff Dalton, who'd failed her so profoundly when she'd first asked for help, offered his congratulations with genuine emotion in his eyes. But once the crowd dispersed and the excitement faded, once Mary and Thomas went back to running the mercantile and the town returned to its daily rhythms, Eliza found herself alone with a freedom she had no idea how to navigate. She was no longer Harlan Moore's wife. She was simply Eliza Moore, a woman with no husband, no home, no income, and no clear path forward. The exhilaration of the judge's verdict gave way to a quieter, more persistent anxiety. What now? What did freedom actually look like when you'd forgotten how to live without fear? Reed found her sitting on the bench outside the mercantile 3 days after the trial, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of orange and gold. He'd been giving her space since the verdict, staying close enough to ensure her safety, but distant enough to let her breathe. Now he approached carefully, as if she were a skittish horse that might bolt at any sudden movement. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Eliza gestured to the empty space beside her. Reed settled onto the bench, removing his hat and turning it slowly in his hands. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, watching the townspeople go about their evening business. "You've been quiet these past few days," Reed said finally. "Mary's worried." "I know. I've tried to reassure her, but I don't think I'm very convincing." Eliza pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "The truth is, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. Everyone expects me to be celebrating, to be overjoyed that I'm free, and I am, in a way. But I'm also terrified." "Of what?" "Of everything." The admission came easier than she'd expected. Of what comes next, of how I'm going to support myself, of what people will think of me, of whether Harlan will find a way to hurt me even from behind bars, of whether I'll ever be able to trust anyone again, of whether I'll ever feel safe. She laughed, a brittle sound. "Quite a list, isn't it?" "Sounds reasonable to me," Reed said. "You've just escaped 5 years of hell. It'd be stranger if you weren't scared." "But I'm supposed to be free now. Free people aren't supposed to be afraid all the time." "Says who?" Reed turned to look at her directly. "Eliza, freedom doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means having the right to feel afraid without someone punishing you for it. It means getting to make your own choices, even when those choices are hard. It means building a life on your own terms, at your own pace." "I don't know how to do that," Eliza admitted. "For 5 years, every decision I made was about survival. What would keep Harlan calm? What would avoid a beating? What would get me through another day? I don't know how to make decisions that aren't about surviving anymore." "Then learn," Reed said simply. "One decision at a time. Start small. What do you want for dinner tonight?" The question was so mundane, so ordinary, that Eliza almost laughed. "What do I want?" "Yes, not what Mary wants, not what's easiest, not what you think you should want. What do you actually want to eat tonight?" Eliza thought about it, really thought about it, and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd considered her own preferences about anything as simple as food. "Apple pie," she said finally. "I want apple pie, the kind my mother used to make, with cinnamon and a lattice crust." "Then let's go get the ingredients and make one," Reed said, standing and offering her his hand. "See? One decision made. That's how you start." They walked to the mercantile together, and as they gathered flour and apples and cinnamon, Eliza felt something shift inside her. It was small, this shift, barely noticeable, but it was there. A tiny spark of something that might, eventually, grow into the ability to live rather than just survive. Mary was delighted when Eliza announced her intention to bake a pie. And soon the kitchen above the mercantile was filled with the comforting scents of cinnamon and baking apples. Reed stayed, sitting at the table and telling stories about his travels while Eliza worked the dough with flour-dusted hands. It was peaceful, domestic, ordinary in a way that Eliza's life hadn't been in years. Where will you go? Eliza asked as she crimped the edges of the crust. Now that the trial's over, now that Harlan's locked up, I assume you'll be moving on soon? Reed was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that. And? And I'm thinking maybe I've done enough moving for a while. Maybe it's time to put down roots somewhere. Eliza's hands stilled in their work. Here? In Red Willow? Why not? It's got a good climate, decent people, once you get past their tendency to mind their own business when they shouldn't. And it's got opportunities for a man who knows horses and ranching. Reed, you don't have to stay for me. You've done more than enough. You've given me my freedom. You don't owe me anything more. I know I don't owe you, Reed said, and there was something in his voice that made Eliza look up from the pie. But what if I want to stay? Not out of obligation, but because I choose to. Would that be all right? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Eliza wasn't sure she was ready to examine. Before she could formulate an answer, Mary bustled in with Thomas, and the moment passed. But later that night, as Eliza lay in bed eating a slice of the apple pie she'd made, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that Reed Walker might become a permanent fixture in her life. Not as a protector, not as an obligation, but as something else entirely. Something that looked almost like friendship, or maybe, eventually, something more. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. The next week brought Harlan's criminal trial, and this time Eliza attended as a witness rather than a petitioner. Judge Harrison heard the evidence methodically, testimony about the fire, the break-in, the knife attack. Reed showed his still-healing arm. Thomas and Mary described the terror of that evening. Sheriff Dalton presented the physical evidence. Harlan's defense was minimal and ineffective. His lawyer, a nervous young man from Tucson, tried to argue that Harlan had been driven to extremes by his wife's abandonment, but Judge Harrison shut down that line of reasoning with a look that could have frozen water. A man's feelings, Harrison said coldly, no matter how hurt or angry, do not give him the right to commit arson or attempted murder. Mr. Moore made his choices. Now he'll face the consequences. The sentence was swift and severe. 5 years in territorial prison for arson, assault, and attempted kidnapping. 5 years during which Harlan Moore would be far away from Red Willow, far away from Eliza, unable to threaten or harm her. Eliza watched as they led him away in chains, and she waited to feel something. Relief, perhaps. Or vindication. Or even pity for a man whose own demons had destroyed him. But all she felt was a quiet, profound exhaustion. This chapter of her life was finally, truly over. With Harlan gone and the legal proceedings concluded, Eliza had to face the practical realities of her new life. She had no money of her own, no trade beyond the basic household skills that every woman learned. Mary and Thomas offered to let her stay as long as she needed, but Eliza was determined to find a way to support herself. I can't live on your charity forever, she told Mary one morning over breakfast. I need to find work. What kind of work? Mary asked. There aren't many opportunities for women in Red Willow. I can sew, Eliza said. I'm good at it. Mother taught me before she died, and I've kept up the skill even during... She couldn't quite bring herself to say during my marriage, so she just gestured vaguely. I could take in mending, alterations, maybe even make dresses if someone would give me a chance. Mrs. Patterson has been looking for someone to help with her sewing, Thomas offered. She's got more orders than she can handle by herself. I could introduce you if you'd like. Within a week, Eliza had her first paying work. Mrs. Patterson proved to be an excellent teacher, showing Eliza techniques she'd never learned and trusting her with increasingly complex projects. The work was hard and the pay modest, but it was hers. Money she'd earned through her own labor, not given to her by a husband or accepted as charity. The first time she held her week's wages in her hand, Eliza had to fight back tears. It wasn't much, a few dollars, but it represented something profound. Independence, self-sufficiency, the ability to take care of herself. What will you do with it? Reed asked when she showed him proudly. He'd taken to stopping by the mercantile most evenings, ostensibly to check on her safety, but really, Eliza suspected, just for the company. Save most of it, Eliza said, but I think I'll buy myself something small, something I want rather than something I need. What's that? A book, Eliza said. I used to love reading before I married Harlan. He said it was a waste of time, that I should be doing useful work instead of filling my head with nonsense. I'd like to read again. Reed's expression softened. What kind of book? I don't know yet. Maybe I'll ask Mrs. Patterson what she'd recommend. Eliza folded the bills carefully and tucked them into her pocket. It seems silly, doesn't it? Using my first wages on something frivolous when I should be practical. It's not silly at all, Reed said. It's you claiming back a piece of yourself that Harlan tried to take. That's about as practical as it gets. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, carefully, Eliza began to rebuild her life. She rented a small room of her own above the dress shop, modest but clean and entirely hers. She built a clientele of regular customers who appreciated her skilled needlework. She saved her money religiously, building a security that meant no one could control her through financial dependence. And through it all, Reed stayed. He'd found work at a ranch outside town, breaking horses and managing livestock. The work suited him, and he was good at it. The ranch owner, a widower named Samuel Hayes, offered him a permanent position with the possibility of partnership if things worked out. Hayes is getting older, Reed told Eliza one evening as they walked along the edge of town. He's got no children, no one to leave the ranch to. He's hinted that if I stick around, prove myself reliable, he might be willing to sell me a share of the operation. That's wonderful, Eliza said, and meant it. You'd be good at running a ranch. I've been thinking about it, Reed admitted. Thinking about what it might mean to have something permanent, to build something rather than just drifting from place to place. He paused, then added carefully, to have roots somewhere. They'd reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open desert stretching toward the mountains. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold and shadow. Reed stopped walking and turned to face her. Eliza, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Eliza's heart began to beat faster. All right. These past few months, being here in Red Willow, seeing you most days, watching you build your new life, it's meant something to me. You've meant something to me. Reed's voice was steady, but his eyes showed uncertainty. But I don't want to assume. I don't want to push. You've just gotten free from one man's control. The last thing you need is another man trying to stake a claim on your life. Reed, let me finish, he said gently. I'm not asking you for anything right now. I just need to know if there's a possibility, someday. Not tomorrow, not next week, maybe not even next year. But someday, when you've had time to heal and figure out who you are outside of what Harlan made you, do you think you might want... He trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. Do you think you might want to build something with me? Partnership, friendship, maybe eventually something more? Eliza looked at this man who'd stepped between her and violence when no one else would, who'd kept watch through cold nights to ensure her safety, who'd given her space to heal while remaining close enough to help when she needed it, who'd never once pressured her, controlled her, or tried to make her into something she wasn't. I don't know, she said honestly. The thought of being with anyone, of trusting anyone that way again, it terrifies me. Even you, and you've given me no reason to fear you. I know. But, Eliza continued, I also know that I value your friendship. I look forward to our conversations. I feel safer when you're near, not because I need protecting, but because I know you see me as a person rather than as property. And maybe, given time, that could grow into something more. I can't promise anything, Reed. I'm still figuring out who I am, what I want, what kind of life I'm capable of building. But if you're willing to be patient, I've got nothing but time, Reed said, and his smile was warm and genuine. And Eliza, you don't owe me anything. Not gratitude, not affection, not anything beyond what you freely choose to give. I want you to understand that. Whatever happens between us or doesn't happen, it's your choice, always. The emphasis on those last words made Eliza's throat tight. Your choice, always. After 5 years of having no choices, of having her agency stripped away piece by piece, those words were a gift beyond measure. Thank you, she whispered. They walked back to town in comfortable silence, and when they parted ways at the dress shop, Reed tipped his hat to her the same way he had that first day in the street. Respectful. Courteous. Seeing her as worthy of dignity. That night, Eliza lay in her small room and allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by survival. A future where she might laugh freely, love safely, live fully. It was still hard to picture, still clouded by fear and doubt and the scars that Harlan had left on her soul. But it was there, a possibility, a hope. And hope, Eliza was learning, was the first step toward healing. The seasons changed. Autumn gave way to winter, and winter to spring. Eliza's sewing business flourished as word spread about her skill and reliability. She moved from her small room to a slightly larger one with space for a proper sewing area. She bought herself not one book but several, rebuilding the small library she'd lost when she'd married Harlan. She also began to venture out more, accepting invitations to church socials and town gatherings. At first it was terrifying, all those eyes on her, all those whispered conversations that she was sure were about her failed marriage and scandalous divorce. But gradually, she realized that most people had moved on to other gossip, other scandals. Her story was old news. And the people who mattered, Mary and Thomas, Doc Crawford, Mrs. Patterson, and yes, Reed, they saw her for who she was becoming rather than who she'd been forced to be. Reed continued his work at the Hayes Ranch, and his partnership with Samuel Hayes grew stronger. The old rancher, seeing Reed's dedication and skill, began teaching him the business side of ranching, managing accounts, dealing with buyers, planning for the future. Hayes sat me down yesterday, Reed told Eliza one Sunday afternoon as they shared lunch on the bench outside the mercantile. Said he's impressed with my work. Said he wants to make me a full partner by year's end. Reed, that's wonderful, Eliza said, genuinely delighted. You've worked so hard for this. I have, Reed agreed, but I wanted to talk to you about it before I gave him my answer. Why would you need to talk to me? Because becoming a partner means committing to staying in Red Willow permanently, means building a life here, putting down those roots we talked about. And I wanted to make sure, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to make sure that's still all right with you, that you're comfortable with me being a permanent part of this town, this community. I don't want my presence to make your life harder. Eliza set down her sandwich and turned to face him fully. Reed Walker, your presence has never made my life harder. It's made it possible. And the thought of you leaving, of you not being here, she realized with some surprise that the thought actually hurt. I'd miss you, more than I probably should, given that we're just friends. Are we? Reed asked quietly. Just friends? It was the question Eliza had been avoiding for months. The reality she'd been dancing around because acknowledging it meant being vulnerable again, meant risking her heart again, meant trusting someone with the parts of herself that Harlan had tried to destroy. I don't know what we are, Eliza said finally, but I know that when I think about my future, you're in it. I know that I trust you in ways I never thought I'd trust anyone again. I know that your company brings me joy rather than fear, and I know that the idea of building something with you, whatever that something might be, doesn't terrify me the way it did 6 months ago. And now? Reed prompted gently. How does it make you feel now? Hopeful, Eliza admitted. Cautiously, carefully hopeful. Like maybe I'm ready to consider the possibility of more than just survival. Like maybe I deserve more than just safety. Like maybe I'm capable of something that looks like happiness. Reed's expression softened, and he reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. His grip was warm and gentle, nothing like Harlan's bruising holds, and Eliza didn't pull away. Then I'll tell Hayes yes, Reed said. I'll become his partner, build a life here, put down roots, and I'll continue to be here, in whatever capacity you want me. Friend, partner, or someday, if you're willing, something more. But only when you're ready. Only when you choose it freely. That might take time, Eliza warned. I'm still healing, still figuring out who I am outside of fear. I told you before I've got nothing but time. And Eliza, watching you heal, watching you reclaim yourself, watching you become who you were always meant to be, that's a privilege I don't take lightly. They sat together on the bench, hands clasped, watching the spring afternoon unfold around them. People passed by, going about their daily business. But for once, Eliza didn't worry about what they thought, what they whispered, what judgments they might be passing. All that mattered was this moment, this choice, this careful, fragile hope that was growing stronger every day. By summer, Reed was a full partner in the Hayes Ranch, and Eliza's sewing business had grown to the point where she was considering hiring an apprentice. They continued to see each other regularly, their friendship deepening into something that felt like the foundation of something more substantial. Reed never pushed, never demanded, never expected anything from Eliza beyond what she freely offered. And slowly, day by day, Eliza found herself offering more. A smile came easier now, laughter felt less foreign. Touch, which had once been associated only with violence, was becoming something that could bring comfort. One evening in late July, as they walked along the edge of town in the cooling dusk, Reed stopped suddenly and turned to her. "Eliza, I need to tell you something." The serious tone in his voice made her tense instinctively, old fears rising to the surface. "What is it?" "Harlan's being released early. Good behavior, overcrowding at the prison. I don't know all the details. But Sheriff Dalton got word today. He'll be out in 3 weeks. The news hit Eliza like a physical blow. 3 years. Harlan had served only 3 years of his 5-year sentence, and now he was coming back. Coming back to Red Willow, coming back to the town where she'd built her new life. "He can't come near you," Reed said quickly. "The restraining order is still in effect. If he violates it, Dalton will arrest him immediately, and I'll be here. I won't let him hurt you again." But Eliza barely heard him. All she could think was that her past was coming back, that the monster she'd escaped was being let loose, that her hard-won peace was about to be shattered. "I can't do this again," she whispered. "I can't live in fear again. I won't." "Then don't," Reed said firmly. He took both her hands in his, gripping them tight. "Don't let him steal your peace. Don't let him take back what you've built. You're not the same woman you were 3 years ago, Eliza. You're stronger now, freer, and you're not alone." "But what if shot?" "No what ifs," Reed interrupted. "We deal with what is, not what might be. And what is that you're a free woman with a life you've built yourself, friends who support you, and a man who—" He paused, then continued with quiet intensity. "And a man who loves you and will stand between you and any threat, including Harlan Moore." Eliza's breath caught. "Reed, I know the timing's not ideal," he said. "I know you're scared, and this is probably the last thing you need to hear right now, but I need you to know I love you, Eliza, not because I feel obligated to protect you, not because I pity you, but because of who you are. Your strength, your resilience, your capacity to hope, even after everything you've been through. I love you. And whatever happens when Harlan gets out, we'll face it together." Eliza stared at him, her mind reeling. Love. Reed loved her. And the terrifying thing, the wonderful thing, was that she loved him too. She'd been falling in love with him slowly over these past months, too afraid to name it, too scarred to trust it, but it was there. It had been there for a long time. "I love you too," she whispered, and saying the words felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to say that to anyone again, but I do. I love you." Reed pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in her life, Eliza understood what it meant to be held with tenderness rather than possession. She let herself sink into the embrace, let herself feel safe in someone's arms, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, love didn't have to mean pain. "We'll get through this," Reed murmured against her hair. "Harlan's release, whatever he tries, whatever happens, we'll get through it together." And standing there in the gathering dark, wrapped in the arms of a man who saw her as an equal rather than as property, Eliza believed him. The 3 weeks before Harlan's release felt like holding your breath underwater, knowing you'd eventually have to surface, but dreading that moment with every fiber of your being. Eliza tried to continue with her normal routine, tried to focus on her sewing and her customers and the life she'd built, but the knowledge that Harlan was coming back cast a shadow over everything. Reed moved into a room at the boarding house in town, closer to Eliza's shop, and Sheriff Dalton made it clear to everyone who'd listen that Harlan Moore would be watched closely the moment he set foot in Red Willow. The restraining order was reviewed and reinforced, and Dalton personally assured Eliza that any violation, no matter how small, would result in immediate arrest. But Eliza had lived with Harlan long enough to know that legal orders meant nothing to a man who believed the law had wronged him. He'd find a way around it. find a way to hurt her, find a way to reclaim what he believed was his. It was only a matter of time. The day of his release came and went, and Harlan didn't come to Red Willow. Days passed, then a week, then two, and still there was no sign of him. Sheriff Dalton sent inquiries to the prison and received confirmation that Harlan had indeed been released, had signed the papers acknowledging the restraining order, and had left the area. "Maybe he's learned his lesson," Mary suggested hopefully one evening as they closed up the shop. "Maybe 3 years in prison taught him that violence has consequences." "Or maybe he's planning something," Eliza countered, unable to shake the feeling of impending doom. "Harlan doesn't just give up. He never has." She was right to be wary. 6 weeks after his release, Harlan made his move, and it came from a direction no one had anticipated. Papers arrived from Tucson, delivered by a messenger, addressed to Eliza Moore. Inside was a lawsuit claiming that the divorce had been obtained under fraudulent circumstances, that Eliza had lied about the abuse, and that Harlan was seeking to have the divorce overturned and his rights as her husband reinstated. "He can't do this," Mary said, reading over Eliza's shoulder. "He was convicted of assault. There were witnesses, medical records. How can he claim the abuse was fabricated?" "Because he's desperate," Reed said grimly. "He'd come immediately when he heard about the papers. He knows he can't approach Eliza directly without violating the restraining order, so he's trying to use the legal system against her, force her back into his control through the courts instead of through violence." "Will it work?" Eliza asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. "Can he actually overturn the divorce?" "Not if we fight back," Reed said. "We get a lawyer, we present the same evidence we presented 3 years ago, we make sure Judge Harrison understands what Harlan's trying to do." But hiring a lawyer required money that Eliza had been carefully saving for her future, money she'd planned to use to eventually buy her own shop. The thought of spending it all on legal fees, of watching her hard-earned independence drain away in court costs, made her feel sick. "I'll pay for it," Reed offered immediately. "Whatever it costs, I'll cover it." "No," Eliza said firmly. "I won't let you do that. This is my fight, my freedom, my future. I'll pay my own legal fees." "Eliza, I mean it, Reed. You've done enough, more than enough. But I need to do this myself. I need to prove that I can protect what's mine, that I'm not helpless, that I'm capable of fighting for myself." Reed looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment he nodded. "All right, but I'll be there, every step of the way. And if you change your mind about accepting help, financial or otherwise, you tell me." The lawsuit dragged on for months, eating through Eliza's savings and her peace of mind in equal measure. Harlan's lawyer, a slick man from Tucson with more ambition than ethics, painted a picture of a manipulative wife who'd used false accusations to escape a loving marriage. He claimed that Eliza had been having an affair with Reed Walker, that she'd conspired with him to frame Harlan, that the entire divorce had been a scheme to free herself to be with her lover. The accusations were absurd, easily disproven, but they were also designed to shame Eliza, to make her relive the worst moments of her marriage in front of a courtroom full of strangers, to force her to defend not just the truth of the abuse, but her own character and morality. Judge Harrison, presiding over the case once again, listened to both sides with his characteristic stern patience. He reviewed the original evidence, heard new testimony from Eliza and Reed and the townspeople who'd witnessed Harlan's violence, and examined the medical records that Doc Crawford had meticulously maintained. "Mr. Moore," Harrison said at the conclusion of the hearing, his voice cold enough to freeze desert sand, "I presided over your criminal trial 3 years ago. I saw the evidence of what you did to your wife. I heard testimony from multiple witnesses who corroborated her accounts of systematic abuse. I sent you to prison not because I was deceived by a clever woman and her supposed lover, but because you committed serious crimes that warranted serious punishment." "Your Honor, if you'd just listen," Harlan's lawyer began. "I'm not finished," Harrison interrupted. "This lawsuit is not a legitimate legal challenge. It's harassment. It's an attempt to use the court system to continue the abuse you inflicted on Mrs. Moore during your marriage. And I will not allow my courtroom to be used for such purposes." He banged his gavel with finality. "The divorce stands. Mrs. Moore remains a free woman, and Mr. Moore remains bound by the restraining order that prohibits him from approaching, contacting, or harassing her in any way. This includes filing frivolous lawsuits designed to intimidate or financially burden her. Should Mr. Moore attempt any similar legal action in the future, I will consider it contempt of court and will pursue sanctions accordingly. This case is dismissed." Eliza felt her knees weaken with relief. It was over. The lawsuit was dismissed, the divorce still valid, her freedom still intact. She'd won. But the victory felt hollow when she calculated the cost. Nearly all her savings were gone, spent on legal fees and court costs. The shop she'd dreamed of buying would have to wait another year, maybe longer. She'd have to start rebuilding her financial security from almost nothing. "You did it," Reed said as they left the courthouse. "You fought for yourself and you won." "I won," Eliza agreed, "but it cost me almost everything I'd saved, everything I'd worked for." "Not everything," Reed corrected gently. "You still have your freedom, your business, your future. Those are worth more than any amount of money." He was right, Eliza knew. But it still hurt to see years of careful saving disappear in a matter of months, to feel like she was starting over again just when she'd finally gotten ahead. Harlan left Red Willow after the lawsuit was dismissed, and this time he didn't come back. Sheriff Dalton received reports that he'd headed east, possibly back to where he'd grown up, possibly just drifting from town to town like the bitter, broken man he'd become. Eliza didn't care where he went as long as it was far away from her. With Harlan truly gone and the legal battles finally concluded, Eliza could focus on rebuilding what she'd lost. It took another year of hard work, of taking every sewing commission she could manage, of saving every spare penny, but eventually she had enough to make a down payment on the dress shop she'd been renting. Mrs. Patterson, ready to retire, was happy to sell to someone she trusted, someone she knew would take care of the business she'd built. The shop became Eliza's, truly, legally hers, and she painted a new sign to hang above the door. "Moore's Fine Sewing," it read, and seeing her name on that sign, claiming her identity separate from Harlan's shadow, felt like a final victory. Reed was there the day she hung the sign, helping her position it just right, beaming with pride that made Eliza's heart warm. "Moore's Fine Sewing," he read aloud, "has a nice ring to it." "It does," Eliza agreed. Then more quietly, "Though I've been thinking maybe someday it might have a different name." Reed's hand stilled on the sign. "Different how?" Eliza took a breath, gathering her courage. 4 years had passed since Reed Walker had stepped between her and Harlan's fists. 4 years of healing, growing, learning to trust again. 4 years of Reed's steady presence, his patient love, his unwavering respect for her autonomy and choices. She was ready. Finally, truly ready. "Reed Walker," she said, turning to face him fully, "I think it's time we had a conversation about the future. Our future." A slow smile spread across Reed's face. "Is that so? You've been patient with me. More patient than anyone had a right to expect. You've let me heal at my own pace, make my own choices, build my own life. You've never pushed, never demanded, never made me feel like I owed you anything." "Because you don't owe me anything," Reed said. "Everything between us has to be freely chosen, or it's not worth having." "I know, and that's why I'm choosing this, choosing you, choosing us." Eliza reached for his hands, lacing her fingers through his. "I love you, Reed. I've loved you for a long time, but I needed to be sure I was loving you freely, not out of gratitude or dependence or fear of being alone. I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own first." "And can you?" Reed asked softly. "Yes, I can stand on my own. I have my shop, my independence, my life. I don't need you to survive." She squeezed his hands. "But I want you in my life anyway, not as a rescuer or a protector, but as a partner, an equal, someone to build a future with on terms we both choose freely." Reed's eyes were bright with emotion. "Eliza Moore, are you asking me what I think you're asking me? I'm saying that if you were to ask me to marry you, I might say yes, but only if we do it right. Only if we build something different from what I had before. A partnership based on respect and trust and equality, not ownership." "That's the only kind of marriage I'd want," Reed said. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small wooden box that looked worn from being carried around for a long time. "I've been carrying this for over a year, waiting for you to be ready. or maybe waiting for me to believe I deserve to ask. He opened the box to reveal a simple silver band, elegant in its plainness, nothing like the showy ring Harlan had given her so many years ago. "Eliza Moore," Reed said, and his voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Not because you need protecting, not because you owe me anything, but because we choose each other freely and equally." "Yes," Eliza said, and the word felt like flying. "Yes, I'll marry you." Reed slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. And maybe, in a way, it had been, crafted over 4 years of patient waiting, careful trust building, and gentle love. They were married 3 months later in a simple ceremony attended by everyone who mattered. Mary and Thomas stood as witnesses. Doc Crawford gave a short speech about the power of courage and redemption, and Sheriff Dalton admitted that watching Eliza's journey from terrified victim to confident woman had taught him to be a better lawman and a better man. But the most important moment came not during the ceremony itself, but the night before, when Eliza and Reed sat together on the porch of what would soon be their shared home on the Hayes Ranch. Samuel Hayes had decided to fully retire and sell his share of the ranch to Reed, giving them a ready-made life to step into. "Are you nervous?" Reed asked as they watched the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. "Terrified," Eliza admitted. "But not for the reasons you might think. I'm not afraid of you or of marriage itself. I'm afraid of my own memories, my own scars. I'm afraid that the fear will come back, that I'll flinch when you touch me, that I'll wait for violence that will never come." "Then we'll go slow," Reed said, "as slow as you need. And if the fear comes back, we'll face it together. Eliza, I need you to understand something. This marriage, our marriage, it's not about me having rights over you or you owing me obedience. It's about two people choosing to build a life together, to support each other, to be partners in every sense of the word. I know, but old fears die hard." "Then we'll kill them slowly," Reed said. "One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of safety at a time, until your heart finally believes what your mind already knows, that you're safe with me, that you'll always be safe with me." The wedding night was gentle and patient, Reed's hands careful and asking permission with every touch, Eliza's fears gradually melting away in the face of tenderness she'd never known existed. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when old memories surfaced, when Eliza tensed without meaning to, when fear tried to override trust. But Reed was patient, stopping whenever she needed to stop, holding her when she needed comfort, giving her the space to work through her responses without judgment. "We have time," he murmured as they lay together in the darkness. "We have all the time in the world. There's no rush, no expectation, no debt to pay. Just you and me, learning each other, building something new." And slowly, over weeks and months, that's exactly what they did. They built a life together on the ranch, working side by side to manage the land and the livestock. Eliza continued her sewing business, converting one of the ranch's outbuildings into a proper shop where customers could come for fittings and consultations. Reed proved to be as good a rancher as Samuel Hayes had hoped, and the operation flourished under his management. But more importantly, they built trust. Reed taught Eliza that disagreements didn't have to end in violence, that expressing needs wasn't grounds for punishment, that a husband could actually listen to his wife's opinions and value them. Eliza taught Reed about the patience required for real healing, about the courage it took to be vulnerable after trauma, about the depth of strength that resided in someone who'd survived the unsurvivable. The first year of marriage had its challenges. There were nights when Eliza woke from nightmares about Harlan, when the old terror gripped her so completely that she couldn't remember where she was or who she was with. Reed learned to wake her gently, to give her space to reorient herself, to remind her with quiet words and careful touch that she was safe, that Harlan was gone, that this life was real. There were also moments of unexpected joy. The first time Eliza laughed so hard she cried, doubled over at something ridiculous Reed had said, and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt such uncomplicated happiness. The first time they worked together to solve a problem on the ranch, and she realized that her opinions were not only heard, but valued. The first time she initiated physical affection without fear, reaching for Reed's hand simply because she wanted to hold it. By their second anniversary, Eliza realized that she'd gone weeks without thinking about Harlan at all. The man who'd dominated her thoughts for so many years, who'd controlled her through fear even after he was gone, had finally faded into the past where he belonged. She was free of him not just legally, but emotionally, psychologically, completely. "I've been thinking," she told Reed one evening as they sat on the porch watching another sunset, "about how far I've come. About who I was when you first met me and who I am now." "You've always been strong," Reed said. "I just helped you remember it." "No, it's more than that. When you met me, I was surviving. I was enduring. I was getting through each day, but not really living. Now," she gestured to the ranch around them, to the life they'd built. "Now I'm living, really living, making choices, building things, planning for a future. I have dreams again, Reed, real dreams that don't involve just making it to tomorrow." "What kind of dreams?" Reed asked, though his smile suggested he might already know. "I want to expand the sewing business, maybe hire that apprentice I've been thinking about. I want to help other women who are where I was, show them that escape is possible, that freedom is worth fighting for, and—" she paused, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "I want to have a family, children. I want to show them what a real marriage looks like, what love without violence looks like. I want to raise them to be strong and kind, and to never think that hurting someone is acceptable." Reed's hand covered hers. "We can do all of that? Together." "Together," Eliza echoed, and the word felt like a promise. 5 years after their wedding, Eliza stood in the yard of their ranch, watching her 2 children play in the afternoon sun. Daniel, 3 years old, was chasing chickens with the focused determination of a toddler who hadn't yet learned that chickens were faster than he was. Sarah, just turned 1, was sitting in the dirt making mud pies and laughing at her own creation. Reed emerged from the barn, saw his family, and smiled the smile that Eliza had come to think of as hers alone. He scooped up Sarah, mud and all, and kissed her round cheek, making her squeal with delight. Daniel abandoned the chickens to run to his father, demanding to be picked up too. Eliza watched them, her heart so full it almost hurt. This was what freedom looked like. Not the absence of fear, not the lack of constraint, but the presence of choice, the ability to build a life on her own terms, the chance to love and be loved without violence, without control, without the constant terror of doing something wrong. "Mrs. Walker!" a voice called from the road. Eliza turned to see a young woman approaching hesitantly, her dress dusty from travel, her face bearing bruises that Eliza recognized all too well. "Mrs. Walker, I'm sorry to bother you, but Mrs. Patterson in town said you might be willing to talk to me. She said you'd understand. She said you'd been where I am." Eliza's heart clenched with recognition and compassion. She'd been expecting something like this ever since she'd started quietly letting it be known that her home was open to women who needed help, needed advice, needed to know that escape was possible. "Of course," Eliza said warmly, moving toward the young woman. "You're not bothering me at all. Come inside. Let's talk." As they walked toward the house, Eliza glanced back at Reed, who nodded his understanding. This was important. This was how she transformed her own suffering into something meaningful, how she took the pain Harlan had caused and turned it into hope for someone else. Over coffee and gentle conversation, the young woman, her name was Catherine, told a story that was heartbreakingly familiar. A husband who'd seemed kind at first but had turned cruel. Beatings that started small and escalated. Fear that had become a constant companion. And now, finally, the desperate hope that maybe there was a way out. "Is there?" Catherine asked, her eyes pleading. "Is there really a way to leave? Everyone says a wife belongs to her husband, that I made my vows, that I have to endure whatever he does. But I can't anymore. I just can't." "Yes," Eliza said firmly. "There's a way. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's possible. I'm living proof of that." She told Catherine her story, condensing 8 years of suffering and 4 years of healing into an hour's conversation. She explained about the legal options, the importance of documentation, the need for witnesses and evidence. She talked about the fear that came with leaving, the challenges of rebuilding a life, the long process of learning to trust again. But she also talked about the hope, the freedom, The possibility of a future defined by choice rather than control. The first step is the hardest, Eliza said. Standing up for yourself, saying no, walking away from someone who's convinced you that you're worthless without them. But once you take that first step, once you prove to yourself that you can survive without him, the rest becomes easier. But where would I go? I have no money, no family, no skills. You have more than you think, Eliza interrupted gently, and you have people who will help. Stay here tonight if you need to. Tomorrow we'll go see Sheriff Dalton, talk about your options. We'll visit Doc Crawford, document your injuries. We'll start building your case for freedom, the same way people helped me build mine. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. Because someone did it for me, Eliza said simply. Because a stranger stepped in when I needed help most and gave me the chance at a life I never thought I'd have. Because women who've been where we've been, we have to help each other. We have to show each other that escape is possible, that freedom is worth fighting for, that we deserve better than what we've been given. Catherine stayed that night and several nights after, while Eliza and Reed helped her navigate the legal and practical challenges of leaving her husband. Sheriff Dalton, remembering his own failures with Eliza, was determined to do better this time. Doc Crawford provided medical documentation. Mary and Thomas offered employment, and slowly, Catherine began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be free. It was the first of many such conversations Eliza would have over the years. Word spread quietly among the women of Red Willow and the surrounding towns that Eliza Walker had been where they were and had survived, that she understood, that she would help. Some women took her advice and found the courage to leave. Others weren't ready yet, but knowing that someone understood, that someone had made it to the other side, gave them hope to hold on to until they could take that first terrifying step. And with each woman she helped, Eliza felt another piece of her own healing complete. The suffering Harlan had caused her wasn't just a burden to carry anymore. It was experience she could use to help others. It was wisdom born from pain that she could share. It was proof that survival was possible, that freedom was achievable, that life after abuse could be full and rich and worth living. 10 years after Reed Walker stepped between Eliza and violence on a dusty Arizona street, Eliza sat on her porch watching the sunset and tallied up her life. A thriving sewing business that employed 3 women and provided them with living wages and dignity. A ranch that she and Reed managed together as equal partners. 3 children, Daniel, Sarah, and baby Michael, who were growing up knowing that love meant respect, that disagreements could be resolved with words, that no one had the right to hurt another person. And a legacy, quiet but real, of women she'd helped find their way to freedom. 12 so far, each one a victory against the kind of darkness that had once consumed her own life. Reed joined her on the porch, settling into the chair beside hers with the comfortable ease of long familiarity. They sat in silence for a while, watching the children play in the yard, listening to the evening sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. "Do you ever think about him?" Reed asked quietly. "About Harlan?" "Sometimes," Eliza admitted, "but not the way I used to. I used to think about him constantly, replaying the abuse, fearing his return, wondering if I'd ever truly be free of him. Now, when I think of him, it's more like remembering a storm I survived. Terrible while it was happening, but past now. Just a chapter in my story, not the whole book." "That's good," Reed said. "That's healthy." "I heard he died," Eliza continued, "about 2 years ago, drinking himself to death in some town in Texas. Sheriff Dalton told me when he found out, thought I should know, and I felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just nothing. He'd stopped having power over my emotions long before he stopped breathing." "That's the real freedom," Reed observed. "Not just physical distance or legal separation, but emotional liberation. The ability to hear about him and feel nothing." "Yes." Eliza reached for Reed's hand, lacing their fingers together. "I'm free. Truly, completely free. Free to build the life I choose, love who I choose, be who I choose. And I choose this. Every day I choose this life, this love, this future." Reed raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "And I choose you. Every day I choose you." As the sun finally slipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From that terrible afternoon when Harlan's fists had driven her into the dust, to this peaceful evening surrounded by love and safety and purpose. The cowboy who'd stepped in and said, "Not while I'm breathing," had given her the chance to reclaim her life. But it was Eliza herself who'd done the hard work of healing, of rebuilding, of learning to trust again. Reed had been the catalyst, but she'd been the one to transform herself from victim to survivor to thriver. And that transformation, she knew, was the greatest victory of all. Years would pass, bringing joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, as all lives do. But through it all, Eliza would carry with her the hard-won knowledge that she was strong enough to face whatever came, that she deserved respect and love and safety, that she had the right to make her own choices and build her own future. The little girl who'd grown up in Red Willow, the young woman who'd made a terrible mistake in marrying Harlan Moore, the battered wife who'd survived 5 years of hell, they were all part of who Eliza Walker was. But they didn't define her. They were chapters in her story, lessons learned, scars that had healed into symbols of survival. What defined her now was what she'd built from the ashes of her broken marriage, a life of dignity, a love based on equality, a legacy of helping others find their own paths to freedom, a future that was entirely her own. And it had all started with a stranger who'd refused to look away, who'd stepped between her and violence, who'd said 5 words that changed everything. "Not while I'm breathing." Those words had given Eliza her life back, and she'd spent that life proving worthy of the gift, transforming pain into purpose, survival into service, fear into hope. As the children came running in for the evening, their voices bright with laughter and love, as Reed stood to gather them up and shepherd them inside, as Eliza followed her family into the warm glow of the home they'd built together, she sent a silent thank you to that cowboy who'd intervened all those years ago. And she sent an even bigger thank you to herself, to the woman who'd found the courage to say no, to fight for her freedom, to believe she deserved better, and to build a life that proved, beyond any doubt, that survival was just the beginning. The real victory was in learning to live again. And Eliza Walker, nay Moore, had learned that lesson well.